Chapter 1000. It was a long time, but it was full of joy. She felt as if she had returned to the battlefield 400 years ago, fighting with her enemies. But this time, she did not have to worry about the pain of failure. She did not have to watch her friend die in her arms, and she did not have to bear the heavy burden of the task. The best part was that both she and the demon could feel the pain of being stabbed by a sharp blade. And when there was pain, there was reality. Female. I have to say that you did a good job. Caberdabi threw a bloody arm to the ground. Although you are still a reptile, you are much stronger than most of your kind. I didn't choose the wrong person. I'm very pleased with your performance. Really? Zoe mumbled and then spat out a piece of meat in her mouth. It's a pity that your meat is so disgusting. Was it the 5th or 7th day since the battle began? She did not have the ability to estimate time without the help of the sun, the moon, and the stars. She could only roughly estimate the date based on her body's natural reaction. Time here should be fixed in a cycle. For example, thirst and hunger would suddenly disappear when they became more and more obvious, and then everything would return to the original state. It was reasonable to regard it as a day. Otherwise, the battle would last for several days, and she would not be able to move. She felt a sharp pain in her broken arm. Obviously, this was not a fair fight. The demon could condense a long sword with magic power, while she could only rely on her fists, feet, and teeth. But Zoe did not care about fairness at all, because winning or losing was not the point. On the battlefield, the pursuit was to kill the enemy and protect oneself, but not here. The broken arm would regenerate in the darkness, and no matter how badly it was injured, it would not lose consciousness. Without death, the pain would be eternal. Moreover, it was not necessary to use a sword to create pain. She noticed that this was the first time since the battle began that the demon slowed down and spoke. But your persistence is meaningless. The senior demon pressed its injured shoulder, and the bloody wound quickly healed. An attack like this is nothing. If you want to defeat me with your teeth, I'm afraid you'll be disappointed. I'll break your teeth bit by bit and stuff them into your stomach. Be prepared. But you still feel the pain, don't you? Zoe took a deep breath and looked at her arm that was gradually recovering. By the way, I want to ask one more thing. Does that pain feel particularly familiar? Female, what do you mean? No, I have to be patient. I can't let it see that I'm intoxicated. That will reduce the fun. Despite thinking so, she couldn't help but chuckle. When you were half dead, you should have felt it every day. She pointed to the position of the shoulder blade, piercing it here and cutting off a piece of flesh. Judging from the frequency of your body shaking at that time, it shouldn't have been too good. Ah, it seems that I forgot to introduce myself. The person who took care of you along the way is me. Insect. Caberdabi suddenly became furious. It roared and raised its sword. I'll crush you. On the 16th day, or even later. The dark ground was covered with blood. Most of the blood was reddish-brown, and a small part of it was blue. In addition, there were broken limbs, internal organs, and of course teeth scattered everywhere. Although the missing parts would be repaired soon, the things that had been separated from the body would not disappear. In such an environment, it was easy to slip and fall if one was not careful. Because of this, Zoe obtained 2 barely usable weapons, a femur that was removed from her thigh, and a half of the demon's spine. The former was equivalent to a short hammer, and the latter could be used as a rapier. As long as one did not directly touch the magic weapon, the 2 weapons were quite easy to wield. 400 years was enough for them to become experts in all kinds of weapons. Her favorite part to attack was still the demon's shoulder. Sometimes the size of the wound had nothing to do with the pain. If you're tired, you might as well take a rest now. Zoe hung the spine on her waist and moved her numb wrists. After all, you're going to torture me for a long time. It's better to take it slow. For the first time, the demon did not respond. Its chest heaved up and down, and its scarlet eyes stared at the extraordinary. The contempt on its human-like face had disappeared. The strength of the 2 did not change. The senior demon's various abilities ensured that it had the upper hand in the battle. Zoe often had to pay several times the price to severely injure the demon. Once she made a mistake, she would suffer for a long time. It was common for her to have her fingers broken, and her stomach cut open. However, even so, the atmosphere gradually changed. Zoe did not care about the demon's silence. I mean, did you create this space? Caberdabi probably really needed a rest, so it slowly opened its mouth. This is a stream of consciousness, a combination of magic power and soul. It doesn't need to be created by anyone. I'm afraid it's hard for reptiles like you to understand. Only 1 in a million can enter the stream of consciousness. I've seen bigger spaces as complete as a world, she interrupted. There are people, trees, sky, and earth, unlike here, where there's nothing. Don't joke, female. The demon growled. You have no idea how much magic power it takes to build a body in the stream of consciousness, let alone a complete world. Only the origin of magic can do this. The origin of magic again. It's just an illusory concept like the realm of God. I don't even know where it is, but you're talking as if you've seen it before. Zoe took off the spine and held it in her hand again. This is engraved in the inheritance. You're the only one who knows nothing about it. Then you can tell me in more detail. Show me some evidence to convince me. Female, do you think I'm a fool? Caberdabi flew into a rage. How could I, Lord Caberdabi, use such a lousy trick? Before it could finish its words, a spear pierced its head. The white spear was exactly the spine that Zoe had been holding. Since you don't want to talk about it, the break is over. You can take a break when you want to talk about it. She raised her leg and threw herself at the staggering Caberdabi. 10 days later. Why? Caberdabi had completely lost its momentum. It put the magic sword in front of its chest and stared at Zoe as if she was a monster. Aren't you afraid of pain? If the war 400 years ago made me accustomed to this feeling, then the depravity 400 years later made me forget it. If there was something that had always been by your side, would you be afraid of it when you lost it and found it again? Zoe smiled. At this moment, she no longer needed to hide her feelings. In fact, I have to thank you. You're the one who made up for what His Majesty couldn't give me. You're crazy. Compared with hundreds of years, this is just a short moment. Now it's your turn to please me. When Zoe stabbed the demon's chest again, the scene in front of her suddenly twisted. Flesh, internal organs, and bones all turned into nothingness, and a strong sense of dizziness overwhelmed her. Chapter 1001. She's awake. Zoe heard a scream in her ear, and then a few shining swords were placed on her neck. Don't move. Elka's voice also appeared in her mind. Just stay in this position until we know who you are. I see. She noticed that her hands and feet were bound by iron chains. She was lying on her back on the stone bed where the demon used to be, surrounded by a circle of vigilant companions with swords in their hands. This was indeed a decisive decision. It was necessary to imprison the god's punishment army before they could figure out whether it was her or the demon who had occupied the shell. Besides, the first sentence of the god's punishment army did not ask who she was, but put the responsibility of judgment on her own side, which showed the maturity of the manager. After all, after the demon occupied her body, any answer could be a lie. If Caberdabi had not lied to her, the dozens of days she had spent in the dark stream of consciousness were only equivalent to a few minutes in the real world. To be able to make the correct judgment and take the appropriate measures in such a short period of time, it was most likely Elxia's doing. With such a companion, she really had nothing to worry about. When Zoe was about to close her eyes and leave the rest of the work to the others, what she saw made her frown. What are they doing? She saw another stone bed under the magic core. Although she could not see who was lying on it, the answer was almost self-evident from the witches standing next to it. She soon thought of a possibility. Are they going to use His Majesty's dream world to confirm their identity? No one here can order Roland around. If this happened, it could only be the other party's request. But this is too inappropriate. How could Elka agree to this plan? Doesn't she know what the common king means to the god's punishment witches? What's more, from what the demons have said, their understanding of magic power is far better than that of witches. If the dream world is also made of magic power, it is really risky to let a high-level enemy into it. I really didn't praise her. Thinking of this, Zoe could no longer hold back her silence. Wait, don't open the dream world. I'm Zoe. Arshian glanced at her and ignored her. Listen, Kabardabi can change the effect of magic power to a certain extent. If you let it enter the dream, it may have an accident. Wake up His Majesty immediately. Oh, is that so? To be honest, it was so cold lying on that stone slab. If I didn't put a blanket on it, I wouldn't have been able to sleep. But if you were the devil, you could say the same. A familiar voice suddenly sounded above her head. Zoe tried her best to lift her neck and look behind her. Then she saw a gray-haired man. It was Roland Wimbledon, the mortal king. She suddenly relaxed. So he hadn't laid down yet. That's great. For some reason, this senseless and empty body also felt a trace of warmth and fullness, as if her body was no longer empty, but something indescribable, compared to the pain that reminded her of why it was real. This completely different feeling also made her feel peaceful and satisfied. Zoe let out a sigh of relief and said, Indeed, if the devil occupies this body, he may also see the information. Therefore, my method is very simple. I just need Lady Camilla to connect me to the demon again. Just now, I did sense the movement of the soul, so I interrupted the mind resonance. Seeing everyone looking at her, Camilla Derry said hesitantly, But I can't tell which soul belongs to the devil. Are you sure you want to enter the state of resonance? Roland asked. Yes, Your Majesty. There's no third party here. As long as it admits it, everything will be clear. Let the devil admit it. Everyone looked at each other. Anyway, the situation won't get worse, Pasha said. It doesn't matter. If it's Zoe over there, I'm sure I can tell it's her. In that case, if that's the case, Roland looked around and quickly made a decision. Then let's connect again. The familiar feeling soon enveloped her, and Zoe directly sent her consciousness back to Kabardabi's mind. Didn't you say that I'll do it until I'm satisfied? Female, don't be too proud. Almost at the same time, the devil's angry voice rang out. If you don't want to talk about this, let's change the topic. You should know what I'm thinking now, right? Why should I admit it? If you have a way to tell, just use it. The devil sneered. I'd like to see how you, who know nothing about the stream of consciousness, can distinguish different souls. It's fine if you don't want to tell me. Then I'll go there directly, Zoe said carelessly. Wait. What do you mean? Of course I'll go to your place. Using the resonance channel to transfer souls and enter the stream of consciousness, I suddenly feel that I can do it. Although you always talk about reptiles, in fact, extraordinary witches are also very sensitive to the flow of magic power. Even if I can't explain it, I can try to imitate it. She chuckled. Do you remember what I said before? If you don't want to tell me, your rest time is over. Now it seems that you probably don't want to rest. Kabardabi's voice suddenly changed. No, female, I mean wait a minute. It's useless even if you transfer again. I can still catch you easily. After all, there are only two bodies. Zoe said calmly. This time, it's not going to end in a few weeks. Are you ready? Mind resonance did not mean that one could not lie, especially when one side was in a weak position. When the devil's strong malice surged towards him, the latter closed its mouth, which was very rare. After a while, it grinned hideously. This time, it used the body of the crippled god's punishment army. Although it sounded a little embarrassed, it still tried its best to be imposing. Enough! You bugs, how dare you push me, Lord Kabardabi, to this extent? This time it's your win. Keep your voice down. Don't scare His Majesty, Zoe said unhappily through the mind communication. Ahem, female. The devil could not help but choke. You're trampling on the dignity of the higher races. Have you had enough rest? Chapter 1002. The words of the disabled god's punishment warrior made everyone frown involuntarily. The enemy is fighting two wars at the same time, and the other side is their main battlefield? If what Roland said was true, that only a small portion of the demons had fought against humans in the previous battles of divine will, then the situation that had been relatively clear suddenly became a little less optimistic. Based on what he saw in the divine realm, there were a total of 4 competitors in the huge painting. Excluding the underground civilization that had been removed from the list, Roland speculated that the so-called Sky Sea realm was most likely referring to the last and most mysterious painting, the Deep Sea Eyeball. Could it be that after the enemy seized the relics of the underground civilization, they fought with the monsters in the sea, and at the same time had the strength to suppress the humans in the Land of Dawn? If that was the case, then the senior demon's contempt for witches was not groundless. As for ordinary people without magic power, they were probably no different from weeds on the roadside. Of course, he also knew that the demon would not honestly tell him everything it knew. From the fact that it insisted on killing its way into the artillery position alone, to covering up its thoughts and using the mind resonance ability to occupy Zoe's body, it was obvious that even in a desperate situation, it did not give up on the idea of attacking. In a situation where there was no way to tell if it was lying, it was hard to guarantee that the demon was not deliberately bluffing and deliberately trying to cause panic among the humans. Looking at the solemn faces of the people, Roland knew that he had to get the situation back under control. So he shrugged and pretended to be relaxed and looked at Elric. So, this is the real demon? Elric also reacted. Although I don't know what method Zoe used, I don't think she would say such a thing. Good job. You saved me a nap. Roland nodded at Zoe. You can eat whatever you want in the dream world tonight. Thank you, Your Majesty. Zoe could not help but smile, but soon her expression returned to normal. Unfortunately, this demon is already familiar with human perception. Although it can't control its limbs, it can't really read its mind through the mind resonance. It's not your fault. After all, no one has ever deeply encountered a senior demon before. It's normal to make a mistake based on human experience. Devil, you still use this ridiculous name, Caberdabi said disdainfully. You classify all races that are different from you as horrible and evil, but you don't know that you are the insignificant inferior barbarians. However, your good luck ends here. The day the origin of mana reappears will be the day of your demise. Everyone couldn't help but look at each other. This last sentence really sounded like something from the legends. The origin of magic you mentioned. Do you mean the bloody moon? Asked Roland. You only see the surface of everything. That's the style of you reptiles. The senior demon did not comment. Could it be that the red sphere is made of magic? Agatha interrupted. But it doesn't make sense. I've seen the crimson moon with my own eyes. No matter what it is, it's thousands of miles away from this world. You clearly said that the final ascendant will open the path to the origin of magic. Is there a staircase that leads to the sky? Humph. Caberdabi turned his head away. Apparently, he didn't want to explain. Where is the Sky Sea realm? There was no response. Did you destroy the underground civilization? Silence. Your new technology, those deformed demons that can launch black stone pillars, is the inheritance of the underground civilization? Save your energy, bug. Caberdabi finally spoke. I've told you everything I can. As for what I can't say, even if this female. He glanced at Zoe and paused for a moment. I won't say a word. If you want to kill me, do it quickly. But sooner or later, you'll all be killed by the Skylord Hacksword, and I, Caberdabi, will be reborn in the origin of magic. Obviously, the interrogation had reached a bottleneck. However, since the senior demon had been transferred to the body of the god's punishment army, it meant that Neverwinter didn't have to rush. If he handed it over to the Tequila Witches, they would find a way to make it spit out more information. Thinking of this, Roland spread out his hands and said, Since you don't want to talk about these sensitive things, let's change the topic. If this war is just a trivial setback for you, how powerful are you? What about the army of the Sky Sea realm? How are they compared to you? And the Sky Lord you just mentioned, can he compete with the Transcendents? I think these questions have nothing to do with secrets, right? Roland knew that Caberdabi wouldn't be able to resist this perfect opportunity to boast. Oh bugs, Caberdabi said in a loud voice. I can only say that we're far more powerful than you can imagine. Do you know why you're reptiles? Because the difference between an advanced race and an ignorant race is like the difference between a bird and a bug. This is determined by the nature of magic power. At the border between the end of the continent and the Sky Sea realm, our army blots out the sky and the sun. Our movements are enough to intimidate the mountains. If the enemies of the Sky-Sea realm weren't equally powerful, you wouldn't have survived until now. It paused and said, as for the transcendence you mentioned, if you're referring to the strongest females, they could indeed compete with the Grand Lords. But now, the Sky Lord has improved his control of magic power, and has the vigilance and acumen of a commander. In a battle like this, he can drain your blood all by himself. Bugs, when you hear his name in the future, kneel down and beg for mercy. At least he'll let you die a quick death. Roland automatically blocked out the series of exaggerated words. He noticed a few hidden details. The demons' logistics were the greatest weakness of this race. They couldn't move an inch outside of the red mist. If they wanted to support a large army, they had to fight within the influence of the Blackstone obelisk. To be able to fight the demons in the red mist, and even hold up the main force of the demons, meant that the deep-sea monsters weren't as simple as they claimed. Using the phrase equally powerful to gloss over it undoubtedly meant that they didn't want to talk about it. This attitude was a statement in itself. In addition, they didn't treat the enemies of the Sky-Sea realm as reptiles, which meant that the deep-sea monsters had also been upgraded. But there was only one eliminated competitor, which obviously didn't match their initial conjecture. Thinking back, the demons didn't clearly state that they were the ones who eliminated the eliminated civilizations. They only mentioned that only the races that could go to the Sky-Sea realm were qualified to obtain the inheritance. There should be some other unforeseen circumstances. Seeing that the senior demon was still boasting about the unparalleled power of their race, Roland interrupted it. In fact, you don't understand what true power means at all. Caberdabi's face suddenly darkened. Bug, what do you know? A true expert doesn't do it to make the world darker, but to disperse the fog with their own strength. When the world is about to collapse, they even burn their own souls to bring light and heat to all things, just like the sun. What are you trying to say? It's simple. Roland cleared his throat. Since you're so powerful, why don't you light the fire? Chapter 1003. In the conference hall of Neverwinter Castle, all the representatives looked gloomy, especially Agatha and Phyllis. The information from the senior demon had undoubtedly subverted their previous understanding of the world. They had fought from the land of dawn to the edge of the continent for nearly 1,000 years. Countless people had been killed, but they found that the demons had not done their best. On the other side of the vast continent, there was a place called the Sky-Sea realm, where the monsters were no weaker than the demons. The reason why human beings had not been wiped out was that they had held back the demons. This was definitely a heavy blow to the belief of the Tequila Witches. The solemn atmosphere even affected the Witch Union and the sleeping spell. This time, they had taken the initiative to attack the First Army's outpost. Although the results of the battle seemed to be brilliant, and the casualty ratio was the highest in the past 400 years, it was achieved when the demons did not know their opponents at all and coincidentally followed the First Army's ideal battle rhythm. It was still unknown whether they could achieve the same great victory next time. As long as there were more casualties, it would be impossible for human beings, who had lost a large area of land and population, to completely eliminate the demons. Maybe they made it up. Vendi could not help but stand up and encourage them. After all, no one has ever set foot on the edge of the continent. Who knows if it's true or not? I don't think we should take it seriously until we get the confirmation. What do you think? However, only a few people agreed. Agatha cast a grateful look at her and said, although Caberdabi's words were exaggerated, to be honest, I don't think they were all lies, especially the part revealed in the early stage of the soul transfer. At that time, it had almost no control over its body, and what it said was basically what it thought. I think Zoe should have also felt that. Even the words that it said, which were almost like ravings, could corroborate what it said later. Unless it had been preparing this lie for several years and trained itself for a long time, it couldn't have done this. Do you mean the legacy shard? Scroll asked thoughtfully. Yes. If I understand correctly, the legacy shard of any race, that is, the relic of the gods, can upgrade its own race, Agatha said slowly. If the demons had the ability to defeat us and seize the relic, how could they have missed this opportunity? Therefore, there's only one explanation. They really can't spare any manpower. Obviously, more than one person had come to this conclusion. According to the timeline, the demons were no different from the uncivilized barbarians in the early stages of the First Battle of Divine Will. They fought against the scattered human kingdoms for decades, and it was then that the underground civilization found the humans. When the second Crimson Moon came, the enemy suddenly became much more terrifying. In a decade or so, the Union was forced to retreat from the fertile plains. If leveling up could give them such a huge advantage, then the demons should eliminate humans as soon as possible. We really underestimated the strength of the demons, Phyllis said, blaming herself. Now that I think about it, the Union has never looked outside the Kingdom of Dawn for 400 years. Our eyes were always fixed on the familiar land beneath our feet, and we knew nothing of the world beyond the continent. Ignoring the Sky-Sea realm at the end of the continent, we don't even know much about the other end of the Land of Dawn. Oh, what's the other side of this continent like? Roland asked curiously. I've only seen it in ancient books. It's said that it's an extremely barren land with mountains and cliffs everywhere. Its average height is much higher than that of the Land of Dawn, Phyllis recalled. They were hundreds of miles apart, connected by a rising mountain range, and surrounded by the rising and falling sea. Usually, half of the mountain range is submerged in the sea, and only when the tide is low will it be fully visible. It's said that the demons invaded the Land of Dawn through the mountain range. Wait, why does this description sound so familiar? As if I've seen it somewhere before. Roland touched his chin, and suddenly a flash of light flashed across his mind. The towering continental shelf, the endless cliffs, and the huge stone gate embedded in the cliff. Although the last part was not mentioned, the previous description was strikingly similar to what Thunder had seen in the Shadow Waters. Did the exploration team see the continent opposite the Land of Dawn? That's interesting, Roland thought. If Neverwinter is the starting point, then most of the Land of Dawn is in the northwest, while the Shadow Waters is far east of the sea. How could they see the strange continent opposite the Land of Dawn from there? As long as the world was round, even the most sophisticated telescope would be affected by the curvature of the planet. It was possible to see the sky, but it was impossible to directly see such a distant continent. He noticed that Tilly was also looking at him. Obviously, as a member of the exploration team, she also thought of the wonder she had seen in the ruins of the stone tower at the bottom of the sea. It's not built by the Union, but it's used to monitor the continent where the demons live. Who's the owner of the ruins? It seemed that when Thunder went out to sea this time, he would have to entrust him with a thorough investigation of the ruins. It was not a cursory investigation like an explorer. Instead, with the will of the country as the guide, he would turn every corner of the ruins upside down until everything was clear. Your Majesty? Perhaps he had been absent-minded for a long time. When he interrupted his thoughts, he found Agatha looking at him, her eyes full of understanding and relief. Are you all right? She asked. I'm just thinking about something. He waved his hand. Please don't worry too much. I know this news is very stressful for you, but there's still hope for mankind. The Ice Witch said softly in a low voice. When I first woke up from the ice coffin, you told me that mortals would definitely defeat the demons. Now, I have no doubt about it, even if it takes generations of hard work to achieve. That's right, Phyllis echoed. We're only one step away from the ruins of Tequila. After we destroy it, the demons will lose the opportunity to build the obelisk. If they want to destroy us, they'll have to wait at least another 400 years. Even if mankind still fails in the end, it's not your fault. In this regard, you've already done better than the three chiefs. Roland blinked slightly in surprise, and it took him a while to react. His brows were furrowed, because he was thinking about the ruins. Did he make them think that he was shocked by the demons and fell into confusion and frustration? That's why they tried to comfort me and cheer me up. Thinking of this, he could not help but shake his head and chuckle. That's just a bad draw. It's not in my plan to continue hiding in the corner and leave the demons to the people 400 years later. After all, I don't even know if I can live until then. It's more interesting to deal with all the competitors and solve the mystery of the divine will on my own, isn't it? Your Majesty, Most of the witches present could not help but be stunned. Only Anna raised the corner of her mouth. Since you remember I said that mortals will definitely defeat the demons, Roland looked at Phyllis. Do you remember the other thing I mentioned? Chapter 1004. The fireplace in the room was blazing, casting a red glow on half of the floor. Listening to the crackling of the firewood, and looking out of the window at the whistling north wind and falling snow, Ozima felt warm all over. Perhaps it was the sequela of rummaging through the garbage for food when she was a child, but her hands would get frostbite in the winter, and the skin would crack and molt. After moving to Sleeping Island, it didn't get better. Instead, it got worse because of long-term exposure to salty seawater. But now, there were only a few shallow cuts on her fingers. There was no trace of blood, and she did not feel any pain. Although compared to the suffering she suffered when she was a vagrant beggar, the frostbite was not unbearable. But no one would complain about less pain. She had almost forgotten about this kind of comfortable feeling that she had just experienced. The living environment in Neverwinter was indeed indescribably magical. Even the most common houses were very different from those in other towns. For example, this brick house had thick mortar on both sides of the wall, and every corner of the window was closely connected to the brick. No matter how heavy the snow outside was, the interior would not be affected much. Otherwise, it would be difficult to maintain a sufficient temperature by relying on a fireplace alone. If it were an ordinary house in Valencia, it would have been leaky and the doors and windows would be whistling. In addition, there was a hole in the fireplace, which could transmit some heat into the bedroom next door. When the fire was extinguished late at night, the bed would basically be warm. And this was only a small part of what she had found. Similar details could be found everywhere in Neverwinter. The longer she lived in Neverwinter, the more she felt it. Sometimes, Ozima could not help but wonder if the city was built for people to live here. It was a paradise for enjoyment. As for why it was built in the western region, which was the most affected by the months of demons, it was because of the strong contrast. The warmth felt in a place like spring all year round was obviously not as impressive as the warmth in a world of ice and snow. The more impossible something was, the more praiseworthy it would be when it was achieved. For a moment, she almost believed it herself. The soup is ready. Dinner is ready. Doris walked out of the kitchen with a pot of thick soup and placed it on the low table in the living room. Thank you. Ozima handed him a cushion and sat down at the table. 2 dishes and a soup, all of which were made with mushrooms as the main ingredient. This kind of mushroom was called the bird beak mushroom, which was a specialty of the western region. It had an excellent fat texture and fragrant juice. No extra seasoning was needed. As long as some salt was sprinkled on it, it would be delicious no matter how it was cooked. However, she also knew that this was actually the cheapest ingredient in Neverwinter, and its price was comparable to that of wheat. I took advantage of the market clearance sale and bought a lot of mushrooms to store in the house, Doris said happily. Even if we run out of food this winter, these mushrooms should be enough for us to last until spring. Although the taste won't be as delicious after a long time, at least it can fill the stomach. Ozima scooped up a spoonful of soup. In the light of the fire, the oil droplets floating on the surface of the soup reflected a golden luster, which was quite attractive. When she put it into her mouth, the rich fragrance immediately filled her mouth and flowed along the hot soup into her stomach, causing her entire abdomen to warm up. The taste was still impeccable, but she didn't have the same appetite as before. After drinking only 2 spoonfuls of soup, Ozima put down the small bowl in her hand. What's wrong? Doris quickly noticed that Ozima was acting strangely. I'm thinking whether I made the wrong decision that day. After a long silence, Ozima said in a low voice, leaving this place should have been my plan alone. But now I've made everyone and their long-lost relatives lose the chance to live a better life. If Whitey and the others hadn't been freed from the sleeping spell, they might have lived in a big house with a heater by now, instead of a few people crammed into a small room with no room to turn around. Why do you suddenly say this? Doris was stunned for a moment and then comforted her. No matter how small the house is, it's always a shelter. Moreover, their relatives will gradually move out after they save enough money for the down payment. Although it's not as good as the place where the sleeping spell lives, I think it's good enough for 2 people to live in, compared to the days when we were homeless. But it's different now. She interrupted Doris, her tone even a little irritable. Azima had underestimated her own ability and the situation. In the past, she could take everyone to rummage through the garbage for a long time or fight with a group of stray dogs for food. How could she put down her pride and do such a thing now? Even if the other sisters didn't care, she didn't want to make a fool of herself in front of Tilly and the others. She submitted several job applications to the city hall in the way ordinary residents did, but none of them were approved. The Ministry of Construction and the Ministry of Industry all recruited strong adult men, which meant that she couldn't work at the construction site or the furnace area, which had the lowest requirements. In addition, most of the positions required literacy, and those with slightly better pay required a primary education diploma. Even the clerk at the city hall suggested that she go to college to finish her studies first, so as not to delay her bright future. Among the 6 of them, only Doris and White Pear had an unstable job. Doris was employed by the Witch Union to re-enchant the enchanted copper rod created by Miss Mystery Moon. Her salary was close to that of the witches living in the castle, and she could earn about 30 to 40 silver royals a day. Unfortunately, this job was not available every day. Sometimes it was less than once a week. Doris worked as an assistant in a tailor's shop. Since it had nothing to do with her ability, her salary was basically the same as ordinary people, ranging from 15 to 20 silver royals a month, depending on the specific working day. The other sisters also encountered the same predicament as Azima. In other words, the living expenses of the 6 of them fell on Doris and White Pear. Because of this, the warmer and more comfortable life was, the more Azima felt guilty. She had refused Vendi's kindness because she wanted to prove to Nightingale that she was not a coward. Even without the help of the sleeping spell, she could still go on as she wished. However, the current situation undoubtedly made her feel embarrassed. Therefore, there was a hint of impatience in her voice. However, as soon as the words left her mouth, Azima regretted it. "Sorry, I didn't mean to." "It's okay." Doris held her hand. "I know how you feel. What I want to say is that we all agreed with you and decided to leave the sleeping spell together. It's not anyone's fault. As for the living expenses, you don't have to worry about it. You've done so much for us before. Can't you let us pay you back now?" "Pay me back? I'm not doing this for you." "Then we'll do the same, okay?" Doris blinked. But Azima did not know what to say. Looking at the sincere face of Doris, she suddenly felt something surging in her eyes. This feeling, which she had not felt for a long time, was strange, like a rusty iron lock. When it was opened again, it even felt a little sour. However, she tried her best to bear it. As a trusted leader, she had already lost her composure by saying those words. She could not allow herself to make another mistake. Just then there was a knock outside the door. "Who is it?" She quickly looked away, withdrew her hand, and stood up. This was both a question and a cover. Chapter 1005. Walking through the windy and snowy streets, Azima once again stepped into the castle district of Neverwinter. Although it was a bit unusual to summon her at night, out of her trust in Vendi, she agreed to go with her and asked Doris, who wanted to go with her, to stay in the house. In case any accident happened, at least her companions would not be affected. Standing outside the castle gate, Azima could not help but tighten her collar. "Are you cold?" Vendi glanced at her with a smile. "Don't worry, you'll take it off soon after we go in." "Wait. Take it off? Does His Majesty want to talk about?" "Please come in, Lady Vendi." Just as she was feeling bewildered, the door slowly opened to both sides. The guard bowed to the 2 of them, and made an inviting gesture. "His Majesty is currently in the study. I still have duties to attend to, so I won't take you up. Thank you for your hard work." Wendy nodded, took Azima's hand, and led her into the castle. In an instant, a warm wind drove away all the cold and enveloped her body. So, this is the heater. Although she knew that high-class houses were equipped with such a new heating device, which could keep people warm without open fire, she was still a little shocked when she experienced it. The servants walking back and forth in the castle were all dressed in beautiful and light summer clothes. Unlined blouses and long skirts could be seen everywhere. In a corner of the dining hall, many witches were barefooted and running around on the carpet. Compared to autumn, it was more like summer now, which made her doubt her conjecture again. He had indeed built Neverwinter here for the sake of enjoyment. Beside her, Vendi had already taken off her coat and winked at her. If you don't take it off, you'll soon sweat. If you go out again, you'll be in trouble when the cold wind blows and catch a cold. I know. Azima unbuttoned her coat stiffly and involuntarily glanced at Vendi's chest. Although her chest was not small, it was still much smaller than Vendi's. If His Majesty really had that kind of idea, he wouldn't have looked for him, right? With this self-deprecating thought, she followed Vendi up to the 3rd floor and entered the Lord's study. Your Majesty, Azima is here. I salute you, Your Majesty. Azima bent down and glanced at the people in the room out of the corner of her eye. Finally, her eyes fell on a gray-haired man behind the desk. The man in front of her was the King of Grey Castle. She realized that before she got rid of the sleeping spell, she had only seen him from afar at the banquet. Now that she was looking at him from such a close distance, the first thought that came to her mind was that the King of Grey Castle was too young. He had defeated his brothers and sisters before the age of 30, defeated the church, and cleanly took over all the kingdoms and territories. Was this really something that someone his age could do? She could openly object to Tilly, but she could not treat him with the same attitude. Once they left Neverwinter, the sleeping spell would no longer have anything to do with them. However, unless they escaped from Grey Castle, they would be under the control of this man anywhere in the kingdom. Even if she was not afraid of authority, she had to think about Doris and the others. Don't be so polite. The king's voice sounded very calm. In fact, I've been wanting to see you for a long time. I chose to meet you at night because your ability is of great significance to the kingdom. Now that the time has come, I don't want to wait another day. Azima looked up in surprise. You mean you want to recruit me? And it seemed to be a special recruitment. The Witch Union usually offered a higher price for jobs that required the use of their ability. But what did he mean by the time he mentioned? That's right, it's a fixed contract, and the remuneration is also very considerable. Roland raised his teacup and took a sip. 2 gold royals per month, until you complete the task, after which you will be rewarded with another 50 gold royals. What do you think? Azima's heart skipped a beat. Not to mention the reward, the salary of 2 golden dragon coins per month was already equal to the subsidy of the sleeping spell. With this income, she could not only solve her living expenses independently, but also help her companions. As for the remaining 50 golden dragon coins, it would be a good choice, whether it was capital for leaving or for Whitedale, and the others to buy a bigger house after they found their relatives. This recruitment had come at the right time. However, after a long period of wandering, she knew that there was no such thing as a free lunch in this world. Nobles were good at using benefits as bait to lure people into a trap. Even if the other party was the ruler of this kingdom, she could not let her guard down because of this. The pay is indeed considerable, but I need to know what you want me to do first before I can give you an answer. Her ability was most practical in the wilderness. She was good at finding water sources, beast nests and fruits, but Neverwinter did not seem to be short of these things. It's very simple. Help me find a kind of stone. Roland took out a box from the drawer and opened it on the table. This shouldn't be a problem for you. Can I have a look at it? Of course. Azima stepped forward and held the thing in the box in her palm. It was about the size of a thumb and was flaky. Its surface was smooth and cold. Obviously, it had been carefully polished. It was more like a special coin than a stone. In addition, it was grayish-black all over and did not have any outstanding features. It was hard to imagine that this thing would arouse His Majesty's interest. She hesitated and said, "If it's just a stone, I'm afraid it'll be difficult for me to find the source you want." When I was on Sleeping Island, a chamber of commerce once asked me to find the source of gems, but my ability led them to the Burning Fire Islands, where there was nothing but hot and dry sparkle stones. For this, the sleeping spell even paid a sum of money for going to sea. I guess that should be bauxite. In terms of composition, it can indeed be regarded as the source of gems. Roland chuckled carelessly. As for whether you can find what I want, you can try now. Are those black lumps the same as the gems? Azima suppressed her doubts and performed her ability on the stone in her hand. In an instant, a dazzling green light burst out from her hand and almost occupied half of her field of vision. The light was so brilliant that it was no less than the lights in the castle. At the same time, a green light also bloomed from the king's desk. She could not help but be stunned. Only she could see the light. Not only could it indicate the direction of the source, but it could also show the degree of concentration of the source. Most of the time, it was like a firefly, densely distributed in the surrounding world. According to the constantly merging directions, she could go from one gathering point to the next. It was not surprising that the king hid the other part of the stone in the desk. This was just a simple test to confirm whether her ability would work. But what surprised Azima was the intensity of the beam of light. This meant that the inconspicuous stone in her hand and the one hidden in the desk were of the source level. It was the first time that she had seen such a small source level. But how could it be possible? Before going to Sleeping Island, she had obtained a golden dragon by chance. At that time, she had thought of using her ability to find more coins that she had accidentally lost. However, this idea did not come true in the end. After all, there were very few unclaimed coins, and most of them came from other people's pockets. Even if she knew, she could not do anything about it. Nevertheless, she had found out the nearby source. At that time, the strongest reaction was undoubtedly from the underground vault of the Lord's castle. But even compared to that light, this green light was not inferior. Chapter 1006. After a long time, Azima took a deep breath and pointed to Roland's desk. There should be another equivalent one in your drawer. Exactly. Roland smiled with satisfaction and then placed another square box on the desk. But I'm a little curious. Why do you call it equivalent instead of identical? Because the reaction of the two is different. Although they are both source level, the first one is more intense. Azima described what she had seen. Can you find a third equivalent one? Please let me try. She focused her mind and felt the green light in her hand again. Since the previous target was too close, she had ignored the other signs. After concentrating, Azima quickly found 3 other extension lines. They pointed to the east, west, and north, which meant that there were at least 3 sources that were larger than the one in her hand. However, what puzzled her was that although the guiding lines looked very thick, they were actually made up of countless dim, thin threads. After informing His Majesty about the feedback of her ability, Roland nodded thoughtfully. That is to say, you can't know how far it is before you get to the source. Yes. Then let's go east first and then north. Roland quickly made a decision. It's too dangerous to enter the barbarian land from the west. If we can't find the source by the sea, it won't be too late to turn north. Azima hesitated for a moment, and then asked the question that had been bothering her. Your Majesty, is this thing more valuable than gold? She was not a combat witch and had very limited means to protect herself. If this thing was really so valuable, once the information was leaked, not only would she fail to complete the task, but she would also lose her life on the way. The young king probably sensed her concern and said with a smile, in fact, it's both precious and worthless. For those who don't understand it, it's just an ordinary stone with no ornamental value and no use. But for me, it's far more valuable than gold. It's also the key to opening the task line of resplendent radiation. Resplendent radiation? What's that? Azima found that she seemed to understand, but when she thought about it carefully, she didn't understand anything. But considering the uncertainty of the journey, I naturally won't let you search alone. Roland pointed to a guard beside him. His name is Sean, and he's your protector on this trip. In addition, there will also be a team of engineers from the First Army who will go with you. The first priority for this mission is to find the source, so if you need any assistance from other territory officials, you can ask Sean to do it. You mean, let those lords work for me? Azima asked in surprise. Why not? Roland shrugged. They are no longer the masters of the land they used to be. It is their duty to obey the orders of the central government. He paused for a moment. Since it might take a long time to find the source, you can get 30% of your salary in advance, and the rest will be paid once a month. This is the entire contract. What's your reply? Ozima thought for a moment and said, Your Majesty, can you send the salary to Doris? In principle, no problem. Roland raised his eyebrows and said, If that's what you want, then I accept the job. She bowed and said, I'll be ready to set off tomorrow morning. Although there were still many things she didn't understand, at least, she didn't have to worry about her predicament anymore. Besides, she didn't see anything unreasonable about this mission. Besides, with the help of the First Army, it was only a matter of time before they found the source. With the reward of 50 golden dragons, her partner's life would be greatly improved. She couldn't wait to share this good news with Doris. That's good. Roland stood up and said, Then I look forward to your good news. After Vendi saw Ozima off, Roland returned to the French window, looked at the city under the night sky, and let out a long sigh. It's finally begun. Making the sun? Nightingale emerged from the mist. I always feel that you're particularly motivated when it comes to this. Because this is a path of pursuing the fire. Roland sighed and said, From this moment on, mankind has entered a new era. From looking up at the sun to competing with the light, I'm afraid there's nothing more romantic than this. He turned around and pointed above his head. Do you see a yellow exclamation mark? Nightingale shook her head with a smile and said, I only see a dreamer talking to himself. Ahem. Roland almost choked on his saliva. Hey, is it really okay to be so straightforward? I don't want to lie in front of you. Ozima looked away and pretended to be innocent. Roland stared at her with a mixture of anger and amusement. Although he knew Nightingale was only joking, he was afraid that this was also what most people thought before they made the real product. Even he himself was not sure whether this plan would succeed. If there were no witches, he would certainly not have such a delusion. The resources, manpower, and financial resources needed to build the Manhattan Project in his later life were enough to bring down a large country. Trying to replicate it from scratch was tantamount to a fool's talk. However, with the help of magic power, it was not impossible to reach the sun. Moreover, the main feature of this project was that the investment was extremely small, and the main task was concentrated on a few witches. Making a nuclear bomb with bare hands would be a joke in another world, but in this world, it was actually somewhat possible. Therefore, as a preliminary research plan, it could be carried out at the same time as the existing major industrial projects. Even if it failed, it would not have much impact on Roland. In fact, from the moment Lucia evolved on the day of adulthood, he had been prepared in this regard. Taking the opportunity to collect the corresponding elements on the periodic table, he asked the chief alchemist Kyle Sichi to determine the original sample of uranium from a large number of separated elements and properly stored it. Uranium could be said to be widespread in nature. In addition to uranium mines, it could also be found in granite, coal, and even seawater. However, in terms of conventional technical means, it had no value to be mined. However, Lucia's ability directly surpassed the threshold of separation and purification. As long as there was a sample, she could gather the trace elements of uranium bit by bit to meet the needs of the raw materials. The heroic speech at the meeting was more to boost everyone's morale, but there were some words that he hid in his heart. The romance of competing with the light was only half of the reason. If it were not for the crisis of life and death, he would not have made up his mind to implement this plan. However, from the news from the senior demon, he realized that perhaps the human race was already in a crisis of life and death. Where was the end of magic power? He had no idea. He did not dare to look down on this kind of unreasonable unknown power. The demon's speed of progress was astonishing, and the reason was actually the upgrade after seizing the inheritance. Agatha's proposal seemed to have no problems, but the biggest loophole was that the demon would have time to deal with it. The Union had failed miserably because they had neglected this point. If the demons and deep-sea monsters won the third battle of divine will, what would it be like if they were to be upgraded again? Chapter 1007. Why do you look so serious? Nightingale suddenly laughed. In fact, I'll believe whatever you say. But you have to give other people some time to accept it. Otherwise, if you say that something the size of a palm can turn thousands of demons into ashes, no one can imagine it, especially after seeing the real thing Wuxia separated. Really? Roland touched his cheeks, probably considering that humans were facing a life-and-death race against time, which made him unconsciously feel a sense of crisis. But you're right. After all, before I see it with my own eyes, even I don't quite believe it. He turned around and held the inconspicuous stone piece in his hand. This was the beginning of the path of pursuing fire. Purified uranium. With just a few words, it was indeed difficult for people to associate it with the glorious thing. The silver-white surface had become dull because of oxidation, and the cold touch had nothing to do with light or heat. However, Roland knew that under the right conditions, it would naturally show its magical side. In order to collect it, Wuxia and Spear had been busy at the North Slope mine for almost a week after the meeting, decomposing the broken granite around the mine. The Countess even complained about it, thinking that it was inappropriate for her to rummage through the rubble. Using this as an excuse, she took away 5 apprentices from City Hall. But the result was this small piece. Compared with the original sample, this thumb-sized piece of uranium was more than 90% pure. Under Lucia's adjustment, it was divided into 2 layers with uranium-235 on one side and uranium-238 on the other. The ratio was 1:99, which was also the natural ratio of the two in nature. In other words, the uranium element on the surface of the stone piece, which was less than a strand of hair thick, could already be called weapon level. As an almost stable nuclide, uranium-238, which was the majority but not very useful, and uranium-235, which could be used to make ultimate weapons, had a half-life of billions of years. With such a long decay period and the alpha particles released during the decay, the radiation range in human tissues was only dozens of microns, and it could not even penetrate the skin. Therefore, even if one held it in one's hand, one would not suffer any fatal external damage. Of course, this did not mean that direct contact with high-concentration uranium was absolutely safe. After all, some of the alpha nuclides produced by the decay might be highly toxic. It would be troublesome if they stuck to one's hand and entered the stomach. Therefore, Roland asked Soroya to wrap the stone with a transparent film. In addition to preventing it from further oxidizing, it was also to avoid chemical poisoning. Most people in this world did not have the habit of washing their hands frequently. He looked at the item in his hand and couldn't help but sigh. This piece of uranium, which contained great energy, lay quietly in his palm. Before it reached the critical point, it looked so peaceful and harmless, almost no different from ordinary iron. It was no wonder that Pasha and the others were in disbelief. Now that they had taken this step, the first task was to collect all the materials needed for resplendent radiation. Azima was able to find samples with much lower purity through high-concentration uranium coins, which at least proved that it was feasible to use it for prospecting. Although Wuxia could get enough uranium-235 by decomposing and polymerizing it in the mine day after day, that would defeat the original intention of multiple projects. She still played an irreplaceable role in the field of high-end metal smelting. Moreover, it was impossible to make a real live bomb with weapon-grade uranium alone. To prevent it from becoming a dirty bomb, Roland needed a really rare element. It was usually associated with uranium ore, but its content was only 1/millionth of the former. Even with Lucia's help, it would still require a large amount of raw ore. All in all, it was up to Azima. Roland put the small piece of uranium back into the box and locked it in the drawer again. Then he took out an unfinished internal combustion engine design drawing from a file beside him and spread it on the table. Although most people in Neverwinter would go to bed early on a cold and snowy night, Roland still had a lot of work to do. "Are we going to stay up late again?" Nightingale tilted her head and asked. He stretched his neck and picked up the quill. "We finally see hope. I can't let all our efforts go to waste just because I'm lazy. It's not a big deal to sleep less in order to make a name for ourselves." "Really? But it sounds like you don't mean what you say." "Ahem. Didn't you believe everything I said?" But it's also your request to use your ability to confirm your true feelings. Nightingale stuck out her tongue. Okay. I want to do this, okay? Roland said helplessly. I don't want to lose to the demons and the so-called divine will. Yes, I mean it this time. Then I'll go make you a cup of hot tea and some supper. Nightingale smiled. 5 spices barbecue, honey mushrooms, salt and pepper fried prawns and refreshing chaos drinks. What do you think? Hey, you want to eat them yourself. Roland shook his head and did not know whether to laugh or cry. Whatever you like. As you wish, your majesty, she said slyly. The next day, Ozima set out on a journey to find the source of the high-purity uranium with her. At the same time, Roland received another piece of good news from City Hall. The Petroleum Fractionation Tower project jointly participated by the Ministry of Construction and the Ministry of Chemical Industry had completed the construction of Tower Number 1. To show that he attached great importance to the project, Roland attended the launch ceremony in person. The tower was located on the bank of the Redwater River in the industrial area of Neverwinter. It was nearly 25 meters tall and was another masterpiece of new technology and ideas. There was nothing special about the tower itself. It was divided into several layers in the middle and used the different boiling points of oil and steam to separate different products. The specific temperature measurement and evaporation control had been completed in the laboratory. Coupled with Anna's welding skills, the tower could completely meet the requirements of simple fractionation. In fact, the quality of the distillate had little to do with the tower itself. It was so small that in some places, oil could even be produced by building a boiler with bricks. This reminded him of the geography books he had read when he was a child. It was written in the books that the motherland was vast and had everything. However, when he grew up, he realized that the quality of the resources was generally not good, which created a lot of problems for refiners. He found that resources were as different as appearance. The gap between high-quality minerals and low-quality minerals was vast, and could only be made up by hard work. The same was true for oil. Crude oil, which was rich in wax, sulfur, and inorganic salts, was as thick as mud and could not be ignited by fire. It could not be used without further processing. However, light oil, such as the oil fields in Borneo, could be easily ignited and could be directly used as fuel after being extracted. The Black River, which covered almost half of the southernmost region, belonged to the latter. After learning that there was a phenomenon of self-eruption, Roland began to pay attention to this desert. The fact proved that the oil collected from the Endless Cape was indeed of good quality. After fractionation, it could basically meet the current requirements. Although it was not as refined as the products of the later generations, he did not need to pursue a one-step solution. Chapter 1008. Whether it was the transportation, unloading, feeding, or collecting of raw materials, the entire refining area had used steam power to replace manual labor. It was the most mechanized factory in Neverwinter. Since it needed to consume a large amount of coal and crude oil, the plant looked like a huge rectangular square from above. The northern end of the square was directly facing the Redwater River, which served as both a special dock and a coal yard. Several conveyor belts connected to the steam engine continuously transported coal to the boiler room. The parallel black lines formed a sharp contrast with the gray cement ground around it. The other end of the square was used to store marine oil from the shoal. The tracks and the trailers that came and went formed the picture of this half of the square. When there was a shortage of coal, the boiler room could also directly use the unrefined oil as fuel. The oil storage warehouse on the west side of the fractionation tower was half completed. The concrete warehouses lined up like fortresses. Their rough shape was incompatible with the residential buildings on the other side of the river, but they had an indescribable sense of beauty. At the same time, Roland knew that the technical content was not low at all. From the pressure relief valve to the inspection window, the conveyor pipe to the anti-static equipment, from the construction details to the operating procedures, it would not have been so smooth without the experience of the chemical plant. To his relief, he only did the final review and approval of the overall plan, and the design process was completed by the Ministry of Construction and the Ministry of Chemical Industry. Obviously, the mines, the furnace area, and other projects had given them a lot of experience, and they boldly applied it to the new project. Since there was no unified industry standard in this era, from the elevator to the traction winch, each machine had to be processed and assembled by the factory after the parameters were determined on the spot. If one didn't have basic knowledge of engineering and literacy, it would be difficult for both sides to communicate with each other. 2 years after the compulsory promotion of universal education, the effect was gradually showing. As the temperature of the boiler continued to rise, the oil that was heated to the state of steam gushed into the fractionation tower. This could be seen from the snow on the tower, that turned into wisps of water vapor. At this moment, the northern wind had basically calmed down, leaving only the snow falling slowly from the sky. However, the people who came to visit did not move at all. They stared at the beautiful metal tower, their breaths echoing with the steam from the various machines in the square. In this cold winter where there was no sunlight, it actually formed a warmth that did not lose out to the wind at all. So beautiful. Edith stood on the steel bridge and murmured. This place was about a few miles away from the refinement area, so there were not many people around. Occasionally, there would be people hurrying by, but most of them were heading towards the direction of the tower. Other than witnessing the birth of something new, they also wanted to see His Majesty. But when they passed by the Pearl of the Northern region, most people would involuntarily glance at her and the person beside her. There was no doubt that in their eyes, the two women standing in the snow were breathtakingly beautiful. Isn't this just a chimney? What was so beautiful about it? Cole thought to himself, but he didn't dare to say it out loud. If you want to see it, why don't you go with City Hall? Sir Barov clearly arranged a better position, and His Majesty also. Although the terrain here was relatively high and the field of vision was wide, due to the distance he couldn't see clearly. More importantly, this was a good opportunity for people of the same profession to get to know each other. It didn't matter what they wanted to see. When all the officials of City Hall gathered together, the point was no longer just to watch. In the words of the era of the nobles, it was like a banquet. The focus was definitely not on the food, but on the people you talked to and the new friends you got to know. For his sister, who was extremely good at socializing, it was impossible for her not to know this. She had clearly said that he would train hard in City Hall, but she deliberately missed such an opportunity. Sometimes he really couldn't understand what was going on in her head. However, Edith's slight twitch of the corner of her mouth made Cole shut up. "Of course it's for you, my dear brother," she said softly and teasingly. "Do you really want to appear in front of the other officials in your current appearance? Wait, this is all because of your request." It was fine to wear those clothes at home, but he didn't expect to be forced to wear them out. If he was seen by his acquaintances, he was afraid that he would have to jump off the bridge. It was all his fault for being so bored. When he was holding his sister's clothes up and down, his sister suddenly came back and saw him, causing him to give in so easily. Otherwise, he wouldn't have so easily compromised. Cole was about to express a little protest when he suddenly heard a frivolous whistle behind him. He suddenly felt a heat on his face and subconsciously pulled his collar, wanting to bury his head. Well, this isn't the right way to deal with it. A hand pressed against his chin, forcing him to look up again. Then Cole saw the Pearl of the Northern region turn around and look at the passerby contemptuously. Even he couldn't help but shiver when he saw the coldness in her eyes that kept people 1,000 miles away. The passerby took 2 steps back and dared not say another word. He quickly walked out of her sight. "Do you understand?" Edith shrugged. "This is also a test for you. If I was dressed normally, I wouldn't have encountered this kind of thing," Cole muttered softly. "But if you want to participate in politics, something irresistible like this will definitely happen. The only thing you can do is to accept it and try to control it." She paused. "Do you think that when Timothy entered the northern region, I welcomed him with a smile willingly? Everything in the world has different sides. The key is which angle you look at it from. Besides, you couldn't help but try on my clothes. In fact, you were also looking forward to this moment, weren't you?" Cole couldn't help but choke. His sister could always explain some unreasonable actions clearly and logically. At this time, if he continued to argue, he would only be defeated. The right thing to do was to stay silent and wait. As for the last sentence, he would never admit it. However, was the beauty that she mentioned before also because of the angle? After changing the topic and asking the question in his mind, Cole clearly saw a touch of redness on her cheeks. Do you still remember what the winter in the city of Evernight is like? He was a little stunned, and a series of images suddenly appeared in his mind. However, he rarely saw the city in them. Most of the images were of warm fireplaces, ale, and banquets. Basically, he could only think of indoor scenes. After a while, he said with uncertainty, "Does it look peaceful?" "It's dead silent, as if the whole earth is frozen." Edith looked in the direction of the tower. "I always thought that was the normal winter, but now it seems that it's not the case." She exhaled a white breath. "What do you see now?" "The earth is breathing, and the fog is the best proof that it is still active." "I don't quite understand." "This proves that nature can be changed by people." The Pearl of the Northern Region said word by word. "People don't have to live by the sky, nor do they have to follow the rules of heaven and earth. They are suppressed by it because they are weak. When we become strong enough, we can even change the world. Isn't such power beautiful enough?" However, Cole saw something else that was even more beautiful. The woman who said these words seemed to emit an indescribable light. Her long green hair fluttered against the falling snow, which was more beautiful than any natural scenery. The redness on her cheeks was not as fierce as before, and her fair side profile looked extremely vivid. He suddenly had a strong impulse. He wanted to know what the world in Edith Kant's eyes looked like. There's oil." As people around Tower 1 cheered, there was a commotion among the crowd. "What's the oil?" "I heard it's oil." "Is it for frying bread?" "How can that be?" "What's piled up in the yard is coal, not fat meat." "No matter what it is, since it's what His Majesty wants, it must be something special. So we can celebrate." "Yes, long live His Majesty. Long live His Majesty." Soon more people joined in the cheering. Even though they did not know the significance of the fractionation tower, they could not stop themselves from sharing the joy at this moment. The cheering spread like waves. In just a few minutes, the entire refining area was boiling with excitement. Under this kind of atmosphere, the dreadful months of demons seemed to have lost its luster. Looking at the black and white smoke rising from the riverbank and the silver tower flickering in and out of the smoke and snow, Roland's heart was filled with a sense of accomplishment. Chapter 1009. Ha-Yan. When Lorgar crawled out of the warm quilt, her head was still a little swollen. She smacked her lips and tasted the lingering fragrance of the strawberry liquor. It seemed that she had drunk too much again. Ow ow. She could not help but let out a low whimper. She had been like this for more than a week since she returned from the battle. The culprit was, of course, Chief Roland Wimbledon. All the witches who participated in the battle received a generous reward, ranging from dozens of notes to more than 100. As a frontline fighter, she also received 35, which was equivalent to almost 100 golden dragon coins. It was common for Majin warriors to be rewarded after the battle. The reason why the Majin warriors were willing to fight with their lives in the holy duel was not only to show their bravery and glory, but also to fight for more rewards. It was difficult to nourish everyone in the resource-poor desert. If they wanted to live a better life, they had to compete with each other. However, the witches in the Witch Union treated the rewards differently. Every night, after the study, the castle hall would be very lively. With extra money in their pockets, the witches' greatest pleasure was to exchange the notes for various kinds of food in the kitchen, and then share them with the others. Andrea, in particular, not only received the most rewards, but she was also very good at organizing banquets. It could even be said that she was the one who started this trend. Lorgar had to admit that these beautiful pieces of paper seemed to contain some kind of magical power. They spent them effortlessly. It was only when Lorgar calculated the total amount of money they had spent that night that Lorgar realized. However, this kind of activity could not be stopped. It was the first time that the wolf girl experienced such intimate contact among her peers. After deciding to join the Witch Union, she was quickly recognized and accepted by everyone. She was even a little flattered by their trust. Although witches born among the Majin San Nation were called divine ladies and were respected by most of the people, Divine ladies rarely interacted with each other. After all, they were the sharp blades of the race for status. Not to mention eating and drinking together, they would even be extremely vigilant when meeting each other. Of course, although everyone had extra money, it was still difficult to drink chaos drinks to their heart's content. Therefore, Andrea came up with a few guessing games. The winner would drink chaos drinks, and the loser would drink white wine. Abilities were not allowed, and only those with god stones could participate. Then she became like this. Was his luck really that bad? Naturally, Lorgar wouldn't admit it, so it was all the great chieftain's fault. If he hadn't come up with such a paper reward, and instead gave out the golden dragon like before, she didn't believe that everyone would be so generous as to use it up so quickly. No, he couldn't let this continue. The wolf girl patted her cheeks. Don't forget that you're here to hone your martial arts. If you continue to indulge yourself like this, your skills will go to waste. She had never seen the gods' punishment witches celebrate like this. They were always so solemn and calm. This was the tempering of outstanding warriors. Lorgar took a deep breath, put on her sweater, and got out of bed. She planned to go to the third border city after washing up. Everyone there had extraordinary skills. Since he was not allowed to leave the city alone, it was not a bad choice to spar with them. As soon as she walked out of the bedroom, she noticed a piece of parchment tucked under the door of the living room. After joining the Witch Union, she moved to the Witch Building in the Castle District and lived with Sharon. However, Sharon only slept here when necessary, so most of the time, she was alone in the room. So this was for her? Curiously, Lorgar took out the parchment and found it was a letter. She opened the seal and saw her father's familiar handwriting. My daughter, how are you doing in Neverwinter? Did anyone bully you? The handwriting was still sloppy, without the complicated opening and wording of the northern letters. But at that moment, she smelled a hint of desert. She couldn't help wagging her tail. Although Lorgar had made up her mind when they parted and didn't think that she still needed her family's care, she still felt a warmth from the bottom of her heart when she saw this sentence. How could it be? Do you think I'm a 3-year-old? She muttered. It seems that I didn't ask this question. Because you're Lorgar Burning Flame, the third princess of the Wild Flame clan. Only you bully others, no one will bully you, right? Members of the clan have now moved from Iron Sand City to the port of Clearwater, and have been allocated a good piece of land near the river. Although I don't know how the chief treats you, at least he didn't break his promise here. The holy duel has basically been carried out. As long as you can find a job, you don't have to worry about starvation. Therefore, more and more tribes have moved here, and there have been many conflicts over resources. But the northern people are different from the Queen of Clearwater. They forbid private fights and resolutely use the northern law to solve problems. It's a bit inefficient, but at least we don't have to worry about being used as consumables. There are many Sand Nation people who agree with this, so the order is not bad. In addition to rebuilding the port of Clearwater, the tribe has also opened up a lot of farmland in the suburbs outside the city to plant the wheat transported by the river. The Fallen Dragon Ridge has sent several groups of people to teach us how to dig ditches, fertilize, and harvest. I have to say, it's really easy for the northern people to fill their stomachs. The food we collect from the oasis is easily grown by them, and they can grow it several times more than we can. Now everyone is almost living like the northern people. I'm not saying it's bad, but I always feel that something is missing when we don't have to hunt those cunning prey and hone our willpower and strength. My daughter, do you have any good ideas? You should ask the eldest brother these questions. Lorgar curled her lips and continued to read. After talking about the things here, it's time to talk about you. If the chief treats you well, you might as well find an opportunity to show your service to him. I heard that the northern nobles have many hobbies. Maybe he's one of them. The wolf girl suddenly rolled her eyes. Well, put away your claws, I was just saying. Compared to this, I actually want to know to what extent your skills have improved. Did you meet a terrible enemy? Compared to when you first left, you should have made a lot of progress, right? But remember, no matter when, don't be impatient and blind, and never forget the path you are pursuing. Reading this paragraph, Lorgar only felt her cheeks burning, and she almost wanted to bury her head in shame. She did meet the demons and had a big fight with them, But she basically played no role. She thought that the front line would be the first to encounter the enemy, but she didn't expect that the enemy could not even get within 300 meters of the position. She didn't even see the face of the enemy except for being covered in dirt by a strange stone pillar. If she had known this, she would not have chosen to stay in the front line. At least she had fought in the artillery camp in the rear. In addition, she wasn't used to using the special firearm that the Great Chief had forged for her. Its power was indeed astonishing, but she always felt that it wasn't her own strength. She couldn't control it as she pleased, and it wouldn't grow with training. It was very difficult to associate it with a martial technique. And thinking of the indulgence after the war, Lorger could not help but feel even more guilty. If not for the short paragraph at the end of the letter, she almost wanted to fly to the third border city. However, the last part of the letter made the wolf girl frown. By the way, there is a small problem. I heard that the Iron Sand City is not very stable recently. The big clans that have not yet moved seem to be very dissatisfied with a large number of Sand Nation people leaving the Silver Stream Oasis, but the specific situation is not clear. As for whether to tell the chief, it is up to you. If he is too harsh on you because of your appearance, it is normal to let him suffer a little, isn't it? This question hardly needed any hesitation. Lorger put away the letter and opened the door. When she was about to go to the castle, she happened to see Vendi appear at the end of the corridor. She hurried forward and saluted. "Can you take me to see His Majesty? I have something important to tell him." Chapter 10:10. Unexpectedly, the Great Chief did not meet her in the study. When Lorger followed Vendi into the reception hall on the first floor of the castle, she found that besides Roland Wimbledon, there was also a strange woman in the hall. She looked at the woman curiously, and the latter was also staring at her. What made the wolf girl slightly uncomfortable was that the woman's eyes seemed to be scrutinizing her, as if she wanted to see through her. "You're here." Roland was still relaxed and gentle. "I came to see you, because I have a new task for you. Sit down and talk." Yes. After staying in Neverwinter for half a year, Lorger had basically figured out the Great Chief's temperament of not paying attention to etiquette. She sat down directly opposite the woman with her tail curled up. "But please allow me to report a piece of news about the southernmost region." "Oh." The woman raised her eyebrows. "Go ahead." Lorger repeated what her father had heard. "Although I don't think the clans of Iron Sand City pose any threat to the port of Clearwater, it's better to be vigilant. It takes a lot of effort to reclaim a piece of land, but it's easy to destroy it, especially when the main force of the First Army has returned to Neverwinter." "I see." Roland touched his chin and said, "In fact, when we made the relocation plan, the General Staff had considered this aspect. Now that it's been almost a year, they should be ready." Lorger said thoughtfully, "They mean?" "You guessed right," Roland replied with a smile. "Before the threat of the Battle of Divine Will is eliminated, the First Army can't take care of every corner of the kingdom. The matter of the southernmost region has to be resolved by the local forces." He paused for a moment. "Of course, no matter what, I have to express my gratitude to your father. If he's willing to intervene, this matter will definitely be handled more smoothly. Maybe I can write a letter to my father." The wolf girl replied subconsciously. When the words left her mouth, she realized that she had inadvertently stood on the side of Neverwinter. Or the Great Chief. "Since it's a political negotiation, let me handle it." Roland waved his hand. "Besides, I didn't ask you to come here to discuss such a serious issue. First, let me introduce the lady beside me. Her name is May. You may have heard of her other title, Star of the Western Region. Starflower. Troop?" Lorger was a little surprised. She was not very interested in dramas, and had only heard the name from Echo. She only knew that there were two actors who were very popular in Neverwinter, and that was how the Starflower Troop got its name. But what did this have to do with her? "You must be the third princess of the Wildflame clan, right? As expected of the people of the desert, they are indeed different from us." May finally withdrew her scrutinizing gaze, stood up, and gracefully bowed to her. "Nice to meet you, Miss Lorger." Please advise me on our future cooperation. Cooperation? Lorgar looked at the great chief in bewilderment. Roland was not a witch, and she did not have the acting ability of Echo. How could they cooperate? It's like this. Roland raised the corner of his mouth. Do you remember what I said? That more people should accept those witches with abilities similar to yours? The soul shouldn't be related to appearance. No matter they have different body parts or have scales on their faces, they're still one of us. To achieve this, the quickest way is undoubtedly to play a drama. You want me to act in a drama? Lorgar was a little flustered. Although the locals did not show any obvious hostility toward her after she decided not to cover her ears and tail, it was completely different from deliberately standing in the spotlight. But I know nothing about it, and it's not something I'm good at. Besides, I don't feel any obvious malice in Neverwinter. Maybe you should find someone else. Don't worry. Roland seemed to know what she was thinking. You don't have to perform in front of everyone, and the audience isn't Neverwinter. This is an unprecedented attempt. I call it electric. No, magic film. Magic film. The wolf girl repeated. The great chief picked up a strange crystal on the table and shook it in front of her. Only then did she notice that it was not an ordinary ornament. The silver prism was inlaid with 3 dazzling gems and engraved with several blue stripes. As it shook, she could even see cold light flowing in the stripes. This thing is called the sigil of recording. Like the sigil of God's will, it's a technology left over from the tequila era. It can achieve a variety of magic effects by combining different magic stones, Roland explained. However, the function of the time seal is not to change time, but to record a scene and replay it repeatedly. If it weren't for the many high-quality magic stones we collected from the giant devil beast and the senior demon, we wouldn't have been able to obtain such a valuable sigil. In other words, the stage of this performance is not in the central square, nor in any other place but in this real world. When I heard that magic power can do such wonderful things, I was so surprised and happy that I couldn't describe it in words. May sighed. Miss Lorgar may not know much about plays, so you don't know what it means. It's difficult for an actor to maintain the same level in every play due to age, experience, and other factors. Therefore, there's only one peak performance. But now that His Majesty can record this scene, it means that as long as we prepare in advance and rehearse a few times, we can repeat the most wonderful performance repeatedly. Every movement and every expression is in a state of full concentration. This is like a miracle to us. I heard that this kind of sigil was originally only used to record important meetings and ceremonies, but to be able to relate it to a drama and decide to create a story based on the real background, I must say that His Majesty's idea is truly a genius. May praised without reservation. I bet that as long as this news is released, no actor will be indifferent. Even if they have to pay a golden dragon, they won't let go of this historical opportunity. Ahem. The chief showed a rare look of embarrassment. Of course, it's better for the Starflower troupe to win this honor. In the past 2 years, you've done a lot to promote the decree. Then he looked at Lorgar. What do you think? This story can be said to be tailor-made for you. I spent almost half a month writing it in my spare time. Even in the end, Lorgar did not quite understand what was going on in the magic movie. She could not associate a play with a miracle, nor did she want to waste her precious time on such an uninteresting thing. However, when she heard the chief say that this play was specially written for her, she involuntarily changed her mind. Chapter 10:11. After everyone left, Nightingale said, "Half a month's free time? Didn't you just make this decision 2 days ago?" "Don't mind the details." Roland pretended to be nonchalant. "If I didn't say so, do you think she would agree immediately? If Lorgar doesn't agree, Joan will have to play the role. But Joan can't communicate normally until now. She can only be relaxed in front of Lightning and Maggie. Even May won't be able to guide her. That's why I said it so solemnly, so that she can't refuse. This is also one of the negotiation techniques." "Well, let's say you're right." Nightingale twitched her mouth and whispered, "But why do I think that's not the reason she agreed at all?" "Oh, what did you say?" "No, nothing. She whistled and stuffed a piece of dried fish into her mouth. Is the matter in the southernmost region really okay? Roland shrugged and did not pursue the matter further. If it was before the Great Relocation, it might be quite bad news. After all, no one knew what life in the port of Clearwater would be like at that time. But now it's too late for the conservatives to obstruct us. The fact that the chief of the Wild Flame tribe wrote to Lorgar proves that since they chose to stand against the people, they are destined to be unable to cause too much trouble. There were a troop of 500 recruits stationed in the fallen Dragon Ridge and the port of Clearwater, but he did not intend to use this force to go deep into the desert. As long as he informed Brian, who was still in the southern region, he should know how to deal with this matter. The stage of persuasion and demonstration of power had passed. If anyone still wanted to disrupt the order, he did not mind giving them a taste of the iron fist of dictatorship. But it was not worth investing too much energy in such a trivial matter. Roland turned his attention back to the sigil of recording. It had been more than half a month since the months of demons. In the past, the focus of Neverwinter's work would undoubtedly have shifted from construction and expansion to defending the city. This did not even need to be publicized. People had long been ready to fight against the demonic beasts. However, the strange thing was that the entire Northwest was quiet. Not to mention large-scale mixed-species herds, even sporadic demonic beasts were rarely seen. Lightning once flew to the Hermes Plateau, and the situation there was the same. The flag of the royal family of Grey Castle was fluttering on the wall of the new holy city. The nuns were moving bricks back and forth to repair the new blockhouse. The garrison of Coldwind Ridge had also entered the line of defense. However, there was nothing at the end of the snowfield, as if the fertile plain had been frozen. After some discussion, the ancient witches came to the conclusion that perhaps it was the demons who had helped them block the invasion of the demonic beasts. It made sense. Although the Tequila ruins were just an inconspicuous dot in the middle of the plain, there must be a lot of transportation lines and outposts behind it. Perhaps the demonic beasts had already been wiped out. In any case, it was a fact that the border was peaceful. Coupled with the impact of the heavy snow, the progress of various projects had slowed down. In this era of extreme lack of entertainment, the slightest bit of leisure would be magnified. Just look at the witches in the castle who were addicted to playing cards and feasting every day. It was taboo to completely relax after a victory. In order to maintain the vitality of the city and find a way for the witches to release their magic power, the idea of making a movie came into being. Roland had already seen the effect of the sigil of recording in the reflection church of the old holy city. The completely realistic picture and the sense of presence almost crushed the 3D photography of the later generations. In a sense, it was a kind of reproduction of the scene. Before the breakthrough of virtual reality technology, the sigil of recording had irreplaceable application value. Just an ordinary stage play could make the citizens watch it with relish. What would the reaction be if it was a realistic 3D movie? Therefore, when May heard the idea and personally experienced the sigil brought back from the old holy city, it was not difficult to understand why she was so excited that she even lost her composure. For them, this was definitely an epic-making creation. If they could leave their shadow in it, they would definitely be remembered by the whole theater industry. Of course, it was hard for her to imagine that not long after the movie came into being, it had irresistibly replaced the theater and leaped to become the crown of the entertainment industry. However, the sigil of recording also had a disadvantage that could not be ignored. Not only could it obtain raw materials from the demons, but it could also not change the recorded content. According to Agatha, a set of time could record for almost 12 hours continuously. As long as magic power was injected, it would capture the scene facing the magic stone. If it was interrupted, it would stop. This also meant that if there was a mistake in the middle, it would inevitably leave a flaw. To eliminate it, the only way was to activate it for more than 12 hours and start from the beginning. Of course, the part that had been filmed before would also be overwritten. Secondly, the sigil could not be reused. Like Listen, the sigil of recording was also a special combination sigil. However, the former formed a resonance and cut the pedestal, so that it was divided into two parts, listening and speaking. There was a groove at the top of the crystal pedestal. When the last magic stone was inserted and the blood of magic was given, no matter how much content was recorded, it would change from capturing to releasing. This process was irreversible. Stripping off the magic stone would lead to the complete destruction of the sigil. This was obviously an advantage for recording history. As long as it was in the releasing state, there would never be a need to worry about important content being erased. However, if it was a movie, it would be very troublesome. It was impossible to see the effect of the performance in real time. A single scene had to be completed in one go without any mistakes. This seemed impossible. However, Roland still found a way to solve the problem. That was to let Summer rewind the scene first. In this way, no matter how many times she failed, it would not be considered an official shooting. Only when all aspects cooperated seamlessly would the cameraman, holding the sigil of recording, enter the scene and record it. Since the backtrack ability could fast forward, slow down, and pause, as long as it was done properly, even special effects like bullet time could be reproduced. As for the problem of no sound in the backtrack, Echo could do the dubbing. Now that all the conditions had been met, all they had to do was wait for the actors to enter the scene. Thinking of how big of a sensation this thing would bring, Roland was full of anticipation. After washing off her sweat in the castle bathroom, Lorga returned to her room with a bath towel over her head. Without waiting for her tail to dry completely, she threw herself onto the soft bed. A day of sparring had almost consumed all her strength. Her whole body seemed to be aching, but she felt very carefree. Regardless of whether her skills had improved or not, at least she had gotten rid of the waste. She should be able to have a good sleep now. At this moment, she glanced at the yellow book on the bedside table from the corner of her eye. Alright, the script. Lorga pricked up her ears, removed the bath towel, untied her robe, and got into bed. She conveniently took the script into her hands. Ms. May Lannis seemed to have said that for any drama, one must first be familiar with the story. If there was anything that one did not understand, one could ask her at any time. However, this was not the question that Third Princess was concerned about. She just wanted to know what kind of person she was in the Great Chief's heart. Since the story was specially created for her, perhaps it could be used as a reference. Lorga took a deep breath and opened the cover. Then a line of titles came into her eyes. Chapter 10-12. In a capital of mountains with mountains behind it and plains in front of it, there lived two lovely and lively little princesses. The two of them were very close and inseparable. No matter where they went, they would attract the attention and cheers of the people. Unfortunately, the good times did not last long. At the age of 14, the elder sister awakened as a witch. This was not a big deal. The reason why people could settle down in this dangerous place was inseparable from the help of witches. The problem was that the ability that the elder sister obtained was so strange. Not only did it not make her more beautiful, but it also ruined her originally beautiful face. Her ears gradually shrank, and the top of her head grew furry pointy ears. Her fingers grew longer and were covered with hair that was difficult to cut. Even her face was faintly not like that of a human. No one had ever seen such a witch. Even the court teachers were not sure if this was caused by awakening. I don't know who started it, but as the elder princess's condition did not improve, there was a saying in the palace that it was a curse. So I need to play the role of the elder sister? Lorga could not help but touch her face. Fortunately, there was no short hair on her cheeks, but the great chieftain's description was a bit too scary. She had become like this because she repeatedly used her ability. If there was a tendency to become inhuman as soon as she awakened, it would be strange if she was not ostracized and hated by others. Maybe this part should be changed again? The wolf girl turned over, changed into a more comfortable position, and excitedly turned to the next page. Although the younger sister did not mind the change at all, the elder sister herself felt the power in her body growing. This power was so strong that it was almost difficult to control. In order not to hurt the younger sister, she deliberately distanced herself from her and locked herself in the depths of the palace. A crack appeared between the two of them who talked about everything. And this gap lasted for 4 years. Until the winter when the younger sister was 16 years old. An unforeseen event suddenly happened. A foreign prince came to the mountain city and said that he wanted to marry the little princess. His convoy was 5 miles away from the city. His subordinates respectfully called him the Lord of the World. His gold, silver and jewels were more dazzling than the sun. His appearance made all the girls in the city unable to take their eyes off him. The king was very happy and held a grand banquet in the palace to entertain this distinguished guest from afar. All the nobles praised him, believing that if the little princess could marry such a person, she would definitely bring unparalleled wealth and prosperity to the mountain capital. I don't agree. At this moment, the eldest princess, who had not appeared for a long time, suddenly appeared in the banquet hall. She couldn't just sit by and watch her younger sister be taken away from her. However, the estrangement of 4 years made my sister hesitate. In her sadness and disappointment, her power finally went out of control. Not only did she sweep the hall into pieces, she even injured the foreign prince and escaped from the mountain capital. This idiot. Lorgar couldn't help holding her forehead. She couldn't become more familiar with her abilities the more she hid them. The eldest princess must have lacked practice. That's why she was so unfamiliar with her powers. If it were her, she would definitely ask her father to build a martial arts practice field and soak in it every day to spar with others. Only then could she truly grow up. Just like the 2nd year after her awakening, she could already hold a glass of water with her wolf-shaped arms without crushing it. At first, Lorgar only intended to skim through it, but when she reached this point, she found herself immersed in it and couldn't wait to know what happened next. After my sister left the capital, she released all the restraints on herself, and under the magic of the day of adulthood, she turned into a real giant wolf. At the same time, she also discovered the strangeness of the foreign prince. Even though it was winter, the long caravan did not leave any tracks. Even when night fell and the entire world was ruled by the bitter cold, there was not a single trace of light in the carriages. It was as if the people inside were not human. On the other hand, my sister also realized her mistake. The only thing she didn't want to lose in this world was her sister. With the help of her companions, a pigeon and a fish, she escaped from the palace and wanted to find the eldest princess. On the way, she ran into the prince who had caught up with her. Seeing that his attempts to dissuade her were futile, the prince no longer concealed himself. He tore off his disguise and revealed his true face, a sinister and cunning devil lord. He proudly explained the sequence of events. The city of mountains is easy to defend but difficult to attack. If the defense line can be opened from the inside, the demon army can take advantage of the situation and directly insert their blades into the core hinterland of the human population through the secret mountain passage in the city. At this moment, his subordinates were hiding in the phantom convoy, slowly passing through the wide open city gate. No matter how hard the humans struggled, it was already too late. Although my sister was taken away, the pigeon overheard this amazing news and told my sister. The eldest princess did not hesitate to turn around and kill her way back into the city that was in chaos. She helped the guards slowly recover from their disadvantage, and finally led the people who were suddenly enlightened to attack the royal palace. The final battle finally broke out between the demon lord and the witches of Wolfheart. After a fierce battle, the eldest princess finally killed the enemy and saved her sister and the kingdom, but she also passed away because of her serious injuries. After the second princess took over the throne, she built a statue in the city to commemorate her sister. This touching story was also remembered by the world and passed down from generation to generation. Lorgar closed the script, rubbed her sore neck, and let out a long sigh. She felt a heartfelt satisfaction. There was no doubt that in the eyes of the chief, she was already an outstanding warrior. Not only did she protect her companions, but she also turned the tide and single-handedly saved the whole country. This kind of praise simply made her tail stand up. As for the ending of dying together with the enemy, she did not care at all. Dying on the battlefield was a kind of honor, and the stronger the enemy, the higher the honor. Of course, the main reason was that the eldest princess in the story was missing Miss Nana. But there were still a few points in the story that she could not understand. For example, why would the elder sister be so depressed because of her sister's marriage? At that time, the enemy had not revealed himself yet, so in the face of such an excellent marriage partner, shouldn't she be giving her blessing? And the demon lord, why couldn't he just directly take the second princess back? Why did he have to clearly explain his purpose, as if he was afraid that the other party would not understand? He was too careless. But who cares? Since she had promised the chief, she would seriously play the drama, no, the magic movie. As for the training, it would not be too late to do it half a month later. Chapter 10:13. 3 days later, the shooting of the Wolf Princess officially began. Roland had expected that this would be a very novel experience, but he did not expect it to be so interesting. On the first day of the project, it attracted the attention of all the members of the Witch Union. Even though they had never watched the movie, they could still imagine how wonderful the play would be based on the live rehearsal of the participants. Moreover, some of the actors were ancient witches. With the vivid description of their own experiences, the magic movie was even more attractive. If one were to conduct a survey among the witches, the answer would definitely be the dream world. They could not go to the dream world, but now they had the opportunity to see the play in that world, which was naturally very tempting. The next day, the people who ate, drank, and played cards from morning to night suddenly stopped. Instead, there were strong requests to join the filming, including Tilly. If he remembered correctly, this was the first time she had taken the initiative to make a request. Therefore, the crew had to temporarily replace several groups of actors. As long as it did not affect the daily production, Roland was happy to see them join. The participation of more witches also made the development of the play even more interesting. For example, the cameraman was changed from Amy to Lightning. In order to express the closeness of the sisters and their happy childhood life, the little girl slowly descended from the sky above Neverwinter, where the cold wind was howling. She had a panoramic view of the snow-covered city. Then, she skimmed over the streets and passers-by, flew into the castle window with icicles hanging on it, and landed in front of the blazing fireplace. The contrast between the huge city and the small bedroom, the snow and the fire, the passers-by in a hurry and the laughing sisters, instantly outlined the two's closely connected inner world. Of course, it took Roland a lot of persuasion, and in the end he even used his clumsy drawing skills to make everyone understand the meaning of the camera. At the same time, he noticed that May, who was standing beside him, had an indescribable light in her eyes when he explained the basic filming techniques on paper and pen. It was undeniable that the star of the Western region had a talent for drama that ordinary people did not have. She seemed to be able to construct a complete picture in her mind, and every person and thing on the stage could be used by her. This advantage was not obvious for a traditional play that was performed in a fixed area, but after changing to the language of the camera, it was as if she had found an excellent outlet. On the other hand, Irene, who played the role of the second princess, obviously did not have such talent. After that, all kinds of perspective changes became normal. It only took a few days for him to go from simple imitation to drawing inferences. Some of the techniques even had the flavor of modern movies. When the foreign prince appeared, she used the method of photographing him from parts to the whole. First, it was the boots embedded with jewels, then the golden cloak and brocade clothes, and finally the handsome smiling face. Then, she extended the picture to the team of well-dressed attendants following behind, vividly reflecting the characteristics of the rich and powerful. By the way, the prince was played by her husband, Carter Lannis. Although Roland did not want to admit it, the well-groomed chief knight was indeed the face of Neverwinter. The use of the camera was only one of the aspects. What was even more amazing was the appearance of special effects. Basically, there would be new ideas popping up every day, and on this basis, incredible visual effects would be extended. For example, the three-dimensional background created by Soroya, which was enough to pass off as the real thing. For example, the special effects of lightning created by Sharon, Nightingale's mist fading, Molly's magic servant, Shadow's illusion doppelgangers. Maggie played two roles. When she was in the form of a pigeon, she was the sister's good friend. When she was in the form of a devil beast, she became the demon lord's right-hand man. In the snowfield, she fought with the wolf girl. The scene was so fierce that it could be described as the earth shaking, the mountains shaking, and the birds and beasts scattering. Of course, these special effects were inseparable from the support of Lotus and Honey. When the magic movie was halfway through filming, more than 300 people had participated in it. Not only the Witch Union, but also the sleeping spell and the tequila survivors were also very interested. It was more like a carnival than a play. Standing on the city wall, Roland could not help but feel a little emotional as he looked at the lively crowd not far away. He did not expect that it would be a movie that would break the barrier between the three parties and shorten the distance between them. Before this, there had been a subtle difference between these three parties, like oil and water, which would gradually separate when they came together. But now there was no obvious difference between them. No matter what kind of ability they had, they all used it on the same thing. There was no cold boundary between strong and weak, and there was no distinction between regions and factions. As long as they used their brains, they would definitely be able to find their own position. This kind of feeling invisibly diluted the differences between people, and also made the creation a link between people. For him, this was really a pleasant surprise. Roland exhaled a breath of white air, and turned to look at Anna. Don't you want to relax with them? At first, Nightingale would only film when she needed to use her ability, but later, she completely enjoyed it. I have to continue to be busy later. Anna stretched out her hand and showed the oil stains on her cuff. The size of the internal combustion engine parts on the drawing can't be used as a reference. I still need to adjust them. And... Roland blinked. Staying with you is the best way to relax. She smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder. The warm flame spread in all directions, dispelling the chill in the wind and snow. Roland also closed his mouth and enjoyed this quiet moment together with her. After a while, Anna said softly, "The future you promised has been realized." He followed her gaze. Not only were the witches from all over the world integrated with the play, but also the ordinary people in the crew. May was gesticulating as if she was teaching Lorgar and Carter how to act together in the previous scene. Irene was squatting by the side, happily combing Maggie's hair. Maggie squinted her eyes and seemed to be enjoying it. The new members of the troupe and the God's Punishment witches were setting up the props needed for the next scene. Compared with the clear division of labor in the factory, the interaction here was undoubtedly more natural and harmonious. It had nothing to do with their abilities. In the white snow that enveloped everything, they all became the same kind of people. No, there's still a part that hasn't been realized. Roland shook his head. Do you mean the other territories of Grey Castle? Those cities shouldn't be too far away. I'm not talking about the relationship between ordinary people and witches, but another promise, Roland replied with a smile. At first, I thought that we should be fully prepared and realize it step by step according to the process. But now I find that it doesn't matter whether we have it or not. The key is to do it. As for what the consequences will be, there will always be a solution. Just like this movie, because there are no procedures, it can bring more surprises. So this promises. Anna raised her head and blinked her lake blue eyes. He seemed to be able to see the reflection of snowflakes on the slightly rippling lake. Chapter 10:14. Your Majesty, please reconsider. The City Hall director's wails could be heard outside the door before Roland could even see him. When Bear of Herman ran to his desk, panting, Roland calmly put down the teacup in his hand. What's there to think about? The coronation ceremony? No, I mean. Announce to all the territories that you'll marry a witch as your queen. The old chief steward wiped the sweat off his forehead and secretly glanced behind the king. This is really inappropriate, Your Majesty. After submitting the announcement to the City Hall, Roland knew that the news would definitely cause a stir, so he was not surprised by the other party's reaction. If he wanted to eliminate any obstacles, the first thing he needed to do was to unify the voices of the City Hall. He did not make this decision on a whim. After the end of the months of demons, the army of Neverwinter would once again enter the fertile plains to uproot the demons' last stronghold in Tequila. In addition to the spring plowing, new construction plans, and trade, the whole of Grey Castle would be very busy this year. According to the traditional rules, from the time of inviting guests to the time of the coronation. It would take about 2 to 3 months, and it would be even longer if the wedding was included. This was tantamount to lowering the productivity of the kingdom in a disguised way. It was fine to hold one during peacetime, but it was obviously not a good choice now. However, there was a rare tranquility this winter. This could not only stimulate the vitality of the subjects, but also did not need to make a big fuss. Most importantly, Roland hoped to fulfill this promise as soon as possible. Of course, as a feudal monarch with great authority, he was entirely capable of accomplishing all of this by himself. There were too many examples in history where, no matter how absurd the order or the seemingly impossible request was, it could become a reality under the will of the ruler. Moreover, this matter was far from exaggerated. However, since the framework of the city hall was built by him, he would not personally dismantle it unless it was necessary. It was much more efficient to use power within the rules than to wantonly squander it. What's the reason? Roland knocked on the table and asked deliberately. Of course the heir, Bearov said anxiously. Witches can't give birth. This is something everyone knows, especially when the war is coming. If anything happens to you, the other nobles will become restless, and the people won't be able to rest easy. He gulped. If you just want to be with Lady Anna, you don't have to do this. Oh, you mean, you only need to marry a daughter of a minor noble, the steward advised. She can be used to shut everyone's mouths and show her face when necessary. As for how you treat her in the future, it doesn't matter. With this layer of cover, you can do whatever you want. So Anna can't get this title. Nightingale suddenly interrupted. Just because she's a witch? I think Lady Anna won't mind these superficial things. Bearov coughed twice. If it's for the stability of the kingdom. If His Majesty can't speak, I can pass the message. You're not her, how do you know she won't mind? As far as this relationship is concerned, I bet she doesn't want to see a puppet involved in it. But this has nothing to do with feelings, it's about the heir. Enough. Roland raised his hand and said. After all, you just need to give the people under you a reasonable outlet, right? Vent. Bearov was slightly taken aback. Isn't that the case? He pretended to be careless. After defeating the Pope, I took all of her lifespan, so I don't need anyone to inherit the throne. This is also the reason why I decided to marry Anna. Unfortunately, only a few people, including you, know about this. For those who don't understand magic power, if they don't see it with their own eyes, I'm afraid they won't believe it. Because of this, they need a psychological sustenance or outlet to appease their uneasiness. Am I right? Since the battle with the church in Coldwind Ridge, the higher-ups of City Hall more or less knew that he had passed a test called the Battle of Souls. The winner wins everything, and the loser loses everything. Although it sounded very unbelievable, the appearance of the ancient witches and the existence of the transfer of souls added a lot of credibility to this statement. And after he officially used this reason to convince Pasha and the others at the United Front meeting, everyone tacitly agreed to this statement. Yes, that's what I mean. Bearov was completely unaware that he was falling into a trap. As long as there's a nominal heir, the voices of opposition will naturally subside. So I have a simpler way. Roland shrugged. A year ago, when we attacked Hermes, I accidentally found Gerald Wimbledon's lover, and this tavern maid was pregnant with his child. What? What did you say? The director suddenly widened his eyes. Are you sure that the child is Wimbledon's? Yes, his hair and eyes are both gray. He nodded and said. Why didn't you tell me at that time? If you knew, it's still unknown whether the mother and the child could still be alive now. Roland picked up the teacup and took a sip. What do you think? A ready-made outlet is more convenient than your idea, isn't it? An heir candidate who would never be able to ascend to the throne would provide plenty of topics to talk about, but at the same time, wouldn't pose any threat, and could be replaced at any time. Seeing Bearov's flickering eyes, Roland knew that Bearov must have thought of all this. He didn't even need to do much. He only needed to announce to the people that there was such a person, and then recall him back to Neverwinter. The rest would be filled in by the people's discussion and spread. If the mother is a tavern maid, This child can only be regarded as an illegitimate child. I must arrange a higher status for him, otherwise it will cause criticism. Also, it's better to keep this maid under control. Compared with nobles, they are indeed easier to control. Berov had already calculated in his mind. Roland could not help but raise the corner of his mouth. The scene in front of him seemed to have returned to 3 years ago, when he had just become the 4th Prince of Wimbledon. However, at that time, he had to spend a lot of effort to get Berov to follow his rhythm of thinking. Now he only needed a few simple words. As long as it came out of his mouth, no one dared to question the authenticity of it, even if it was something like immortality. Go and make a plan. And when you're done with the enthronement, bring it to me for a look. He waved his hand and signaled Berov to leave. After Berov left, Roland heaved a sigh of relief. I didn't expect you to speak up for Anna. Sorry I couldn't help. No, you don't have to apologize. You did nothing wrong. He could not help but look at Nightingale. He found that her expression was much calmer than he had expected. It's just that I thought you would. Would what? Frowning and sad? Nightingale rolled her eyes at him. I thought you mentioned it too late. Of course, if it wasn't for Anna, I wouldn't have taken this step. Thinking of the relieved look on her face when she reappeared after disappearing for 2 days, Roland could only think that the change had something to do with the agreement between her and Anna. Chapter 10-15. Under the new administrative system, the news that the king was about to be crowned soon spread from the west to the north, and caused a great uproar in various places. Unlike in the past, which relied on merchants and boatmen to deliver the news, City Hall posted announcements in the most eye-catching places in the cities, and arranged for commentators to explain the news. It seemed that they intended to let the common people understand the royal family's decision. With such an official attitude, the news swept through the streets and alleys of the city in just a few days. No matter where one went, one could hear related discussions. It seemed that even the coldness of winter had faded a little. The underground trumpeter, in the old king's city, was no exception. After all, taverns were always a gathering place for hot news. Sitting by the fire, drinking a glass of ale, and talking about rumors that no one knew where, was one of the few ways of entertainment for the common people. As the new owner of the trumpeter, Black Hammer had been grinning from ear to ear in recent days. After winter, the tavern's business was much quieter. However, after the news of the coronation, the tavern returned to its former liveliness. Seeing that the income was rising, Black Hammer was also in a good mood. It could be expected that the discussion would continue until His Majesty's coronation was officially completed and the dust settled. It was a wise decision to ascend the throne during the months of demons. If he could see His Majesty in person, he would not hesitate to bend down and sincerely kiss the tip of His Majesty's boots. After all, there was nothing more lovely than a golden dragon in the world. Of course, as former rats, the possibility of them being allowed to approach Roland Wimbledon was very small. It would be good enough if they could see Sir Theo. Black Hammer was quite self-aware about this. The current Theo was no longer the down-and-out patrol captain, or the nameless bodyguard of Prince Roland. Ever since Timothy had failed in his bid for the throne, he had been showing signs of becoming the most powerful man in the old king's city. In the past, Sir Nagy, the owner of the tavern, would not even look at a rat, but now he was sent to a remote place by Theo. Later, during the Black Street cleanup operation, it was also thanks to Theo's advice that they were able to shed their skeleton fingers' disguise and become official subjects. Incidentally, they also took over the underground Trumpeter Tavern. Black Hammer didn't dare to forget this favor of promotion. He planned to pay a visit to the old king's city with the silver ring, the clay pot, and the little finger. Although it would cost him a lot of gold royals, as long as he maintained his relationship with the old king, he would be able to earn it back sooner or later. Apart from that, he did not forget what he was supposed to do. That was to collect information for Sir Theo, whether it was the bragging of a peddler or the sightings of a traveler on the road. As long as there was something of interest to Sir Theo, he must record it down and report it to the contact. And now, it was obvious that they needed to pay attention to those potential rebels. For example, the guest at table 6. Don't you think this is too much of a coincidence? A red-faced merchant shouted. Not only did His Majesty ascend the throne in such a hurry, but His Majesty just announced that he was going to marry a barren witch. And then he received the news that Prince Roland's widow is still alive and has given birth to a son. It doesn't make sense. His words were echoed by some people. I heard that Prince Gerald doesn't like women at all. And there's even a rumor that he had an affair with a young knight. How could he suddenly have a fiancé? Really? You're not from the king's city, so of course you don't know. Compared with the second and fourth princes, he rarely attends banquets. I can't be wrong about this. And think about it, the merchant said again. His Majesty only said that he would bring the two back to Neverwinter, but he didn't clarify the identity of the posthumous child. Isn't this deliberately leaving controversy and focusing everyone's attention on the right to inherit the throne? Which family does the woman come from? And whether her child has the bloodline of the Wimbledon family? These are enough to drag on for several years, but no one really cares about the real problem. What are you trying to say? What do you mean by the real problem? That's the witches. He gulped down a mouthful of wine. They secretly controlled His Majesty and created the so-called widow and child to distract our attention, so that they can control Grey Castle. The audience was in an uproar. Can witches make people? I tell you, there's nothing they can't make, the merchant said angrily. They can even make a stone floating on the water, let alone a person. It's because of these monsters that no one comes to rent my ship now. Of course, I'm afraid it's still impossible to make a flawless person now, so the witches need time. When they completely succeed, the child naturally won't be needed anymore. Ha ha ha. I think you've lost your mind. Do you think that His Majesty is the only one in the palace, and he only has a god stone of retaliation with him? The crowd suddenly laughed, and the tavern was filled with a happy atmosphere. You burp, laugh as much as you want. Silver City's miners have been replaced by witches, and the river is full of Neverwinter's stone ships. Let's see if you can still laugh when it's your turn, the merchant said with a slurred tongue. Well, although the value of this information is not high, it's also a rebellion if you have the intention to rebel. Blackhammer picked up a charcoal pen and scribbled the characteristics of the other party on a piece of paper, as well as the words slandering the royal family, malicious to witches, and stuffed it into an inconspicuous slit behind the wine cabinet. If there was no accident, the police would soon respond, and when the merchant went out, he would probably be caught red-handed. As for whether the other party was plotting a rebellion, it was the task of the interrogators, and had nothing to do with him. At the same time, in the Earl's mansion in the inner city, what do you think of this dress? Yorko put a high-neck tuxedo made of high-quality fabric in front of his chest and said, Do I look too muscular? The one who answered was Denise Peyton, a businesswoman whom he had met in King's City in the Kingdom of Dawn. She lazily leaned against the headboard and pulled up half of the quilt to cover her bare chest. I've never seen you so enthusiastic even when we were dating. Now you haven't even received an invitation, and you're already preparing to leave as soon as you hear the news? His Majesty and I have been friends for more than 10 years. Why would we need an invitation? That's just for show. Yorko shook his clothes. You haven't answered my question yet. What do you think of this dress? To be honest, you're pretty much the same no matter what you wear. Denise yawned. Anyway, it's not your appearance that attracts me. But if you're going to Neverwinter, what about me? He hesitated. If you want to have fun, maybe I can introduce you to some good. I'm not interested, Denise interrupted him bluntly. I prefer to choose my own targets. Besides, I came all the way from the City of Glow to see you. Is this how you treat your guests? Yorko knew he was in the wrong, so he sighed and asked, Then what do you want? The businesswoman raised the corner of her mouth. Take me to Neverwinter. I've long wanted to see what the king who turned the Kingdom of Dawn upside down looks like. Well, since you've been friends for more than 10 years, His Majesty will definitely invite you to his banquet, right? Denise lifted the quilt and got out of bed. She walked up to Yorko step by step. When the time comes, you just need to take me with you as your partner. I've accompanied you to so many banquets in the City of Glow. This time, you have to fulfill my little wish, right? She wrapped her arms around Yorko's neck and put her lips close to his ear. Don't worry. I know you have someone you really want to see. Not only will I not interfere, but I might even help you. As the news spread, both the commoners and the new local officials became busy. However, the person at the center of the vortex was completely unaware of it. A week later, the shallow water gunboat, Roland, arrived at the city of Evernight in the northern region. Chapter 10:16. Walking through the snow-covered alleys, Olivia felt her chest getting warmer as she listened to the crunching sound under her feet. Winter in the northern region was always the same. The sky was gray and gloomy, like a slab of stone over everyone's head. The earth was covered with white snow, and everything had lost its original color. Coupled with the cold and hunger, it was difficult for people not to feel bored in this monotonous scene. However, she saw a color that she had never seen before. The color was even brighter than a rainbow. Even in this season of howling wind and snow, it was as eye-catching as the stars in the sky. The closer she got to it, the more impatient she became. The end of the light pointed directly to her rented cottage. If it were not for her livelihood, she would not even want to leave it. That was her baby. The baby of her and Gerald Wimbledon. With him, she felt like she had the whole world. Thinking of this, Olivia could not help but quicken her pace. However, when she turned into the last alley, her heart suddenly clenched. There were more than 10 sets of footprints on the snow-white ground. Judging from their direction, they came from another alley and went straight to the entrance of the courtyard. Olivia was living in this courtyard for the time being. Her neighbors were all ordinary civilians. Even during spring and summer, there were few visitors, let alone during the months of demons. Why were there so many footprints? All of a sudden, Olivia felt dizzy, and an indescribable fear welled up in her heart. No, calm down. She kept telling herself that maybe it was just a group of robbers or refugees. Outsiders might think that the situation was equally bad, but for her, it was her last hope. However, when she walked into the courtyard, trembling, she realized that even this glimmer of hope did not exist. The door of her rented house was full of patrolmen in soft armor. One of them was dressed like a knight. The badge on his chest indicated that he was from the Kant family, which ruled the northern region. No. Olivia did not know where she got her strength from. She dropped the milk cake that she had bought with great difficulty, lowered her head, and rushed to the door. At that moment, she was ready to be killed. As long as they pulled out their swords and stood in front of her, she would run into them. However, to her surprise, they seemed to be indifferent to her appearance. They just slightly stepped aside and let her directly rush into the house. Olivia tripped over the threshold. The cold ground tore her dress like a millstone, but the pain from her knees was insignificant. She crawled into the small bedroom with tears streaming down her face. She wanted to see her baby for the last time, but she did not see what she had expected. A blue-haired woman was sitting at the head of the bed, playing with her baby expressionlessly. The nanny who usually took care of the baby was standing aside with her head bowed respectfully, as if she was the nanny of the nanny. The woman raised her head and glanced at Olivia. With just one glance, Olivia understood that this woman was definitely not the same as her. Although she had an unforgettable appearance, she could not associate her with the common women. Gentle, delicate, charming, sensual. Those words that belonged to women did not fit her. Even though she was holding the baby, there was no maternal light in her eyes. Rather than saying that she was playing with a child, it would be more accurate to say that she was playing with a toy. Nice to meet you, the woman said slowly. My name is Edith Kant. You should have heard of me. The Pearl of the Northern Region. Olivia's heart skipped a beat. She was the eldest daughter of Duke Kant, the legendary woman who could lead the knight in battle. There was no one in the Northern Region who didn't know the name of Pearl. Even Gerald had mentioned her many times. Some people even said that she was more difficult to deal with than the Duke himself. Greetings, Your Excellency. Olivia swallowed, bent down, and touched her head to the door. May I ask why you're here? Edith waved her hand. The nanny immediately bowed, and then left the bedroom, closing the door behind her. At this point, Olivia realized that the nanny she had found was arranged by the Kant family. They had long discovered the secret of the baby. To make a long story short, His Majesty asked me to bring the bloodline of the Wimbledon family back to Neverwinter. And then, secretly execute him? Olivia said with difficulty. If you just want to erase his existence, you can do it anywhere. There's no need to waste so much effort. Edith untied the cloth on the baby's head, revealing his light gray hair. His Majesty needs a reason to deceive people. That's all. Olivia was stunned. She really could not understand what Edith meant. Your Excellency, I don't quite understand. It's not as complicated as you think. The Pearl of the Northern Region shrugged. Have you ever heard of witches? After listening to Edith's story, Olivia spent a long time trying to connect the two things together. The conclusion she got was even more unbelievable than the Arabian Nights. Roland Wimbledon is determined to marry a witch, so he wants to use Gerald's child to appease the public? She did not know much about the ways of the nobles, but her intuition told her that this method was too unreasonable. Your Excellency, is it really necessary to do this? She clenched her teeth and plucked up her courage. Your Excellency, please forgive me. Perhaps His Majesty has this idea now, but it doesn't mean that he will in the future. If something happens, Sherlock will. Sherlock? Is that the child's name? Edith raised her eyebrows. It seems that you still don't understand your situation. His Majesty's order is absolute. You only have two choices. You can take a sum of money and go far away and never ask about this matter again. Or you can go to Neverwinter with him, but you can't show up in the name of his mother. You have to be a servant of a noble family. Olivia felt tears welling up in her eyes again. Yes, her identity was too humble to become a member of the royal family. Who will take care of him for me? No one. Huh? She suddenly raised her head and tears flowed down the corner of her mouth. His Majesty isn't that unreasonable. If you choose the latter, except for changing your identity, everything else will be the same. You can still stay with him and watch him grow up. That noble family has been destroyed by the attack of the church, and Gerald's fiancée entrusted the child to you before she died. That's all the story. Edith paused. In addition, this news has already been announced in other territories, including the northern region. Just wait for 2 or 3 days and you'll hear the whole story. If he wants to kill you, why does he need to announce it so openly? Does the Pearl of the Northern Region mean that His Majesty did this mainly to make me feel at ease? Olivia pressed her hand against her chest. She could not help but recall the scene of that night. She had been driven into a corner, so she had found Roland, who was still Prince Roland at that time, and he had indeed helped her. Although he might have some ulterior motives, if it were not for this, she would have been beaten by the tavern owner. She took a deep breath, wiped her face, and stood up from the ground. Kneeling for such a long time made her legs numb, but she still managed to control her body. Your Excellency, may I ask, does this child have a chance to become a king? No. Edith's eyes flashed with a hint of interest. Before we set off, His Majesty specifically told you not to have any illusions. If there is no hope, there will be no disappointment. Of course, this is forbidden to spread. No, Your Excellency, I won't be disappointed. My biggest wish is for him to grow up safely. Olivia's voice became slower and slower, as if every word she said required all her strength. However, this still doesn't solve the problem of His Majesty's successor. If he changes his mind and decides to make a real crown prince, the latter will definitely see Xieluo as a thorn in his side. At that time, I'm afraid he won't be able to survive. She looked straight into Edith's eyes and said word by word. I know I can't change anything, but if you can't give me a reasonable answer, please kill me here and now. Oh. Edith narrowed her eyes. It was the smell of bloodthirst. In front of Edith, Olivia was as weak as a lamb. Even so, Olivia still stuck out her chest and refused to give in. If not, this day will come sooner or later. I can't kill Gerald Wimbledon's child with my own hands, Your Excellency. Of course, there was no answer. Even if there was no need for Edith to tell a humble maid. That was all she could do. I'm sorry, Gerald. Olivia closed her eyes and waited for the cold blade to cut her throat. I'm sorry, my dear. The child woke up from his sleep and cried as if he had sensed the impending departure. Olivia tried her best to stop herself from opening her eyes. She was afraid that she would not be able to make the decision if she saw him again. However, the blow did not come. Edith chuckled. You can. Olivia looked at Edith in disbelief. Then the Pearl of the Northern Region opened her mouth and said the answer silently. It was an even more incredible answer, even beyond her imagination. But somehow, she believed Edith's words. Perhaps when one fell into a whirlpool, even a straw could be the last hope, let alone a drowning Olivia. Rather than being convinced by Edith, it was more accurate to say that she had convinced herself. Edith left the crying child to Olivia and turned to walk out of the door. We'll leave in 3 days. Prepare your luggage. Your Excellency. Olivia murmured as she passed by Edith. There's a tavern owner in Deep Valley Town, and an unknown guard of His Highness Gerald. They may know about this. I'll handle it. Don't worry, Edith said without looking back. When the Pearl of the Northern Region left, Olivia hugged the child tightly, as if she was afraid that he would disappear. The child also calmed down and buried his head in her chest. In her heart, she could not help but ask herself, is it really possible? In the silent conversation, she clearly saw the answer that Edith had said. It was a simple phrase, but it had an enchanting power. Immortality. Chapter 10:17. When Edith returned to the castle, Car and Duke were waiting for her in the hall. You'll only stay in the city of Evernight for 3 days? If I'm not mistaken, this task needs time to develop. You don't need to go back immediately. Why don't you stay a little longer? Edith frowned and asked, Father, did you send someone to eavesdrop on my conversation? If I asked you directly, would you tell me everything clearly? The Duke glared at her. I learned this trick from you. Instead of waiting for the answer, it's better to find it myself. Aha! The Pearl of the Northern Region could not help laughing. Congratulations. You finally made some progress. Now I don't have to worry about you in Neverwinter. The Duke said grumpily. You haven't answered my question yet. Not only did you leave by yourself, but you also want to take Lance with you. Is that Wimbledon really that attractive to you? But he would rather marry a witch than marry into the Kant family. I really don't understand why he brought up Gerald's child. It seems that you have a lot of complaints about me not being able to ascend the throne. Edith squinted at him. Or, in fact, you only care about whether my unborn child can inherit the crown or not. I haven't forgotten what you said to me when Timothy came to the Northern Region. Don't think that I don't know what you've suggested to His Majesty. Calvin's imposing manner was immediately suppressed. I'm just thinking for your sake. Don't you feel that it's unfair to let that wild woman's seed be in the limelight like this? Edith sighed inwardly. She could not say that her father was lying. At least 80% of his words were sincere. However, as far as the result was concerned, it was not a good plan. Carcant might be a good father, but as a lord in charge of a territory, his shortcomings were too obvious. Fortunately, the current generation of nobles in the Northern Region was not very good. In other words, most of the nobles were very poor. No wonder His Majesty did not want the noble system to continue. If she were the king, she would also not allow a group of idiots to waste her property. Because they were on the same level, she should comfort her father, but Edith just couldn't do it. She preferred to turn words into sharp blades. And it would be even better if they could bring pain and torture, whether to others or to herself. Wild woman. No, you're wrong, father. It's not a coincidence that Gerald Wimbledon likes her. That woman only lacks an identity. If she was born into a noble family in the Northern Region, she might be much more outstanding than you. As for my 2 younger brothers, they're not even worth mentioning. In fact, what you need to thank the most is the ancestors of the Kant family. If it weren't for their status as counts, they wouldn't even be able to compete with the ordinary merchants on the street, let alone climb to the position they have today. Just as she expected, her father's expression turned ugly for a moment. Even though she was reluctant at first, after she made up her mind, She immediately confessed those who might harm her. In this regard, that woman is quite decisive. If Gerald's child takes over the throne in the future, do you think she'll hurt me, who once forced her to do so? I think it's quite possible. Edith chuckled. As for the means, of course, she'll do it in a way to vent her hatred. After all, women know women best, don't they? Enough. I know I'm wrong. Carwin finally couldn't stand it anymore and raised his hands in surrender. Can you stop talking? Phew. Edith let out a long sigh of satisfaction. So he'll never inherit the throne. Even if His Majesty doesn't want to, I won't allow it. She flipped her long hair and walked to her father. Let's get back to business. I want to go back as soon as possible so that I won't fall behind too much. Neverwinter is changing rapidly. I've been away from the center of power for a long time after coming here for half a month. If it weren't for His Majesty's order, I wouldn't have come here at all. As for my third brother, I seem to have written in the letter that I'll send him to Neverwinter when he's an adult, but your memory is really bad. But if I send Lance away, the northern region won't have an heir. Edith interrupted. The title of nobility has now become a purely honorary title. If the younger generation is stupid, do you think they can really stand firm in City Hall? I'm taking him away for the future of the Kant family. There are too many new things to learn there. If you don't want to be eliminated, you have to integrate into it. The Duke was still a little hesitant. Didn't His Majesty say that there are terrible enemies in the barbarian land? Haven't you ever considered what we'll do if Neverwinter is conquered? It's very simple. At that time, even if you have a dozen heirs, it'll be meaningless. She spread out her hands easily. And we should thank the demons. What? Carwin said in surprise. I have a vague feeling that if there were no demons, His Majesty would have turned the four kingdoms upside down. The Pearl of the Northern region curled her lips. The current stability is just to fight against the demons, but the day of upheaval will come sooner or later. So in the final analysis, it's not wrong to say that the demons have bought time for us. There's only one chance like this. You should know what to do, right? The Duke was silent for a long time before he sighed. Give preferential treatment to the teachers sent by Neverwinter, open more primary education classes, send more people to study in the Western region, and listen to the advice of the City Hall officials. You've mentioned it many times in your letter. My memory isn't that bad. That's good. Edith patted her father on the shoulder, and then walked upstairs. I'm going to catch up on my sleep. I still have work to do tonight. Wait. Carwin turned around and stopped her. Wild girl. I'm also very curious about Olivia's last question. How did you answer it? Instead of waiting for the answer, it's better to find it out myself, Edith said with a smile. You've made progress just now. Now please keep it up. Hey, that was just a casual remark. Wait, did you deliberately not make a sound? The Duke opened his mouth wide as if he had realized something. You deliberately led me to say that just to shut me up? All right, I won't send anyone to eavesdrop anymore. Now you can tell me, right? My dear daughter, don't take it to heart, father, because it's not important at all. She paused for a moment. I hope it's true, but unfortunately. Unfortunately what? Carwin asked. Chapter 10:18. In the city of Neverwinter, Grey Castle. Ever since the news of the coronation ceremony was announced, Roland had handed over all the preparations to Barov. Barov seemed to be particularly diligent. Not only was he busy every day, but he had also invited Lady Blanche, the ceremonial officer of the Old King's City, to Neverwinter. Obviously, he did not want to make any mistakes. As for Roland himself, apart from occasionally checking the progress of the magic movie, he spent the rest of his time finalizing the internal combustion engine. Since there was a certain error in the weights and measures of the two worlds, the prototype had to pass the stability test. Moreover, the fractionated oil was uneven, so he had to take into account the redundancy of the design. Since he did not have the means of simulating the real world, he could only make adjustments with the real thing. From manufacturing, to experimenting, to scrapping, to improving, and to repeating. Roland felt like he had returned to his school days. Every day, he would travel between the castle and the back mountain of the North Slope, living a busy and fulfilling life of research. The knowledge that he had not touched for a long time became vivid again in the past half a month. Of course, he did not have Anna to accompany him at that time. What was more wonderful was that she was as enthusiastic about new things as he was. Every time he saw her concentrating on assembling the precise parts and wiping the sweat from the tip of her nose, Roland could not help but sigh with emotion. Her desire for creation and knowledge seemed to be innate, just like her flame, scorching and pure. This inner spirit was beyond the scope of what could be described by her appearance. He would never get tired of looking at her. Every time she made a decisive progress, the smile on Anna's face could almost be described as the blossoming of all flowers. Roland even felt that the joy of creation was far greater for her than being a queen. She had never concealed her thoughts. As long as they could stay together, she did not care too much about the false reputation. Of course, Roland also knew that sometimes the reputation was not for the sake of the other party, but for the sake of the public. As long as human beings were social animals, this was inevitable. After marking a series of revised measurements on the blueprint, Roland put down the quill and rubbed his sore neck. If there were no accidents, the design drawings in front of him were likely to be finalized. After all, the previous batch of prototypes had been running steadily for several days, and the accumulated working time was enough to meet the current needs. As the second-generation power source, the principle of the internal combustion engine was not complicated. It could be regarded as the evolved version of the steam engine. The first generation of power source used steam to push the piston. No matter how ingenious the design was, it was impossible to avoid the energy loss caused by the transmission of steam. Therefore, people naturally thought of putting this power directly into the cylinder, which would certainly greatly improve the work efficiency. That was how the internal combustion engine came into being. After mixing the oil with air, it would be injected into the cylinder, causing it to burn intensely. The expanded airflow would push the piston, and at the same time, the new fuel would be sucked into the cylinder. It sounded simple, but it was a huge project to implement. For example, steam engines had very low requirements for sealing. The gap between the piston and the cylinder block of the early products could even be stuffed with a finger. Felt and linen could be used to plug the gap. However, it was obviously not feasible for internal combustion engines. Unlike steam engines, which were powered by external forces, the piston had to complete each cycle by itself. Therefore, if the seal was not tight, the cylinder would stop due to lack of fire. In other words, only when the level of materials and processing technology reached a certain level could this simple principle be turned into reality. That was why the first internal combustion engine in history was actually decades later than the electric motor. The first generation internal combustion engine designed by Roland had a total of 2 directions. One was the cylinder inline type, and the other was the cylinder annular type. The former was stupid and thick, and it was made of cast iron. It was as stable as possible, and it could be put into the factory for large-scale production. The latter was also known as the star engine. Because the crankshaft was short and the structure was compact, it could be made very small, and it was very suitable for spacecraft. Overall, it was much more delicate than the former. It was made of aluminum alloy, and for the time being, only Anna was responsible for the processing. The reason why Roland dared to develop these 2 products at the research and development stage was nothing more than standing on the shoulders of his predecessors. He could find a lot of information about these 2 time-tested products in the dream world. Compared with the steam engine, which had gone through 4 generations, the starting point this time was much higher. Coupled with the information revealed by the senior demon, he had to speed up his pace. It was very difficult to defend the ground against a large number of threats from the sky, which had been proved by the expedition this time. If the plan could be realized, human beings would be qualified to compete with their enemies in the sky for the first time. "Your Majesty, don't move," Nightingale suddenly said. Roland immediately stopped and looked back. "Is there an enemy?" Then he saw Nightingale come up to him and touch his head. He felt a slight pain as she put a strand of hair in front of him. This is white hair? Roland did not know whether he should laugh or cry. Although the color of gray hair was very light, these strands of hair were a little white, almost losing their luster from the roots. And Nightingale touched his hair for a while. Have you had too little rest recently? Have I? You used to sleep late in the winter. Recently, you get up earlier than me and enter the dream world at night. That can't be considered as real sleep, right? She talked incessantly. Yawning from time to time is a sign of fatigue. You're not even 30 years old, and your hair is already white. How can you continue like this? Looking at Nightingale's serious reprimand, Roland could not help feeling much lighter, and even his fatigue from work faded a little. As expected, she was not affected too much. It seemed that the agreement had played a crucial role. Don't worry. This is far from the limit. I've experienced it before. Nightingale looked doubtful, but she could tell that it was not a lie, because he was not lying. Generally speaking, there will be a long period of palpitations, as if the chest is particularly empty. Then you will feel weak all over. You have to be careful at this time. If the reaction is strong, you will cough incessantly and even bleed. Cough, cough, cough. Halfway through, he suddenly coughed violently. Hey, are you okay? Nightingale suddenly looked nervous. She patted his back and said, Do you need me to call Nana? Roland took a deep breath and said, No. I'm fine. I just choked on my saliva. Really? Don't worry, He turned his head and could not help but freeze for a moment. The distance between them was so close that they were almost touching. When their eyes met, both of them could not help but hold their breaths. Your Majesty. Just then, the office door was pushed open and Vendi walked in. I have something to. What are you doing? Me. Roland blinked and found that there was no one in front of him. He was half leaning back, and even without saying, he knew that it must be quite strange. His Majesty is practicing gymnastics. Nightingale was lying on the coffee table, leisurely chewing dried fish. It's easy to get sore after sitting for a long time. He can try the effect first. I see. Vendi said thoughtfully. Is this the gymnastics that you mentioned before that you're going to promote in the academy? But, is it really effective to put it like this? It's okay. Roland awkwardly returned to his original position. He did not know why, but he felt that the innocent Nightingale was trying to hold back her laughter. By the way, what do you want to say? Chapter 1019. In terms of magic power, adulthood always came at midnight. This was one of the unsolved mysteries of witches. Magic power was everywhere, but why was it the most active at this time? Even for a witch like Anna, after her magic power was depleted, she would be able to recover 70 to 80% in the first 2 to 4 hours after midnight. If she were to rely on her natural recovery during the day, she would probably not be able to recover even after a week. Most witches did not care about this, and even the tequila survivors were no exception. When Roland asked them about this, the answer he got was, Isn't a new day supposed to be like this? In most people's eyes, time was divided into days, and the magic power of a day was spent on a day. It seemed reasonable that there would be a new atmosphere every day. However, Roland knew that the date was not a natural concept, but was created by people for the convenience of life. That was why there was the equinox and the precession of the equinox. In order to correct this error, the leap month was invented, and as time became more precise, the leap second, that is the last minute, has 59 or 61 seconds. Whatever was convenient. Therefore, it was a little strange that witches always solidified their magic power at a specific time. It was like every awakened had a biological clock in their body, and they could keep it in sync at any time. No matter when she was born, whether she was in the southernmost region or the Hermes Plateau, they were all connected. Unfortunately, without any observation tools, it was difficult to study magic power or accurately measure time at this stage. He could only use this phenomenon as an empirical theory. Your Majesty, Vendi's words pulled him back from his thoughts. In addition to the above measures, do you have anything else to add? The so-called measures were mainly designed to deal with the possible dangers during the solidification of their magic power. Since the scene of Lucia's day of adulthood, This step had been included in the witch union's consideration. Regarding this point, even the tequila could not provide many useful suggestions. Do as you say. Roland thought for a moment. By the way, don't forget to inform Marjorie and Sandiasaka. I think they must also want to see Lightning reach adulthood safely. Vendi was a little surprised. Madame Marjorie is fine, but that Mr. Flying Bird? He'll be fine, Roland said gently. Yes, I understand. Seeing him like this, Vendi didn't ask any more questions and quickly agreed. At night, the top floor of the witch building was brightly lit. This place had been transformed into a special bedroom for the adult witches. The room was made up of 2 normal rooms connected together, so that it could accommodate more companions. One of the walls had also been transformed into a sliding door structure. In case they needed to release their magic power, they could directly pull open the 2 panels of the door instead of blasting open the outer wall like last time. Lying on the soft bed, Lightning appeared particularly excited. Her behavior was the complete opposite of Lucia's. It seemed that she had been looking forward to this day for a long time. A wooden platform was placed beside the bed. Her left hand was tied to it while her right hand held the sigil of God's will. According to the experience gained from Lucia, as long as she felt a constricting pain in her body, she could pour all her magic power into the sigil. Tying one hand was to prevent the witch from losing control of herself due to the intense pain, and accidentally pointing the sigil at others. After eliminating this risk, Countess Spear's absence was not a big problem. Meanwhile, Lightning was surrounded by her friends who had come to visit. What kind of derivative ability will I awaken? If only I could solve the problem of carrying weight. Then I could bring a lot of food and tools and fly all over the land of dawn. Similar topics almost lasted for the whole night. Her eyes blinked as she listed one possibility after another. She looked very much like Roland when he was a child, guessing what kind of birthday present his family would give him. Of course, most of them ended in disappointment. For example, he longed for a big transformer, but in the end he got a book of 300 exercises. It's also possible that there's nothing, Mystery Moon muttered. It's not that easy to obtain derivative abilities. No matter how I look at it, there are only a few people in Neverwinter who have this talent. After this sentence, Roland seemed to hear a faintly discernible nasal sound, and the rising tone at the end was full of pride. How can you talk like that? Lily glared at her. In fact, what Mystery Moon said is not wrong, Agatha said with a smile. The Union has done statistics, and only 1 out of 100 witches can awaken a derivative ability when they reach adulthood. But compared to advancing to a higher level, this is nothing. After all, the most important thing for a witch is her main ability, which has unlimited potential. So you don't have to worry too much about it. Just focus on the solidification of your ability. By the way, weren't you doing an analysis of the adult evolution? Scroll interrupted. What's the result? That can only be used as a reference. After all, there are not enough examples to verify it. Vendi took out the record book and looked at it. But Lightning's score is really high. What's that? Andrea asked curiously. An evaluation method, Agatha explained. It's also inspired by Lucia. Because the surge of magic during the solidification of adulthood is very obvious. In theory, it is indeed easier to condense. So we made a preliminary evaluation based on the state of all the senior witches when they were promoted. We scored them according to the total amount of magic, subject score, ability control, and individual will. Of course, it's still at the stage of conjecture. Subject score. Do you mean the exam results? Yes, and it accounts for the most part in the formula. I see. It seems that someone will never be able to become a transcendent in this life. Andrea glanced at Ashes with pity. The latter shrugged disapprovingly. It's really crazy. Roland suddenly heard Phyllis sigh. What's wrong? He tilted his head and looked at her. In the tequila era, the promotion of a senior witch was a very sacred thing for every witch. Everyone was eager to get the favor of the gods, but they never dared to talk about it in public. Because it was too far away. If anyone announced that they would be promoted, they would definitely be laughed at by others. But now, Phyllis murmured halfway and seemed to come to her senses. Sorry, I'm not saying it's not good, but the contrast between the two makes me feel. I know what you mean. Roland chuckled. It's like a businessman who, after a nap, finds that the golden dragon he has accumulated all his life is no longer precious. It's always hard to adapt. I'm really not as good as Lady Agatha in this regard, Phyllis whispered. She only came here 1 year earlier than me, but now she has already led a new round of research on senior awakenings. She's indeed a genius of the Union. In fact, it's not difficult to understand. If the future generations are not stronger than the predecessors, how can we make progress? He said frankly. As long as we are still moving forward, this kind of scene will continue to reappear. When you see them, you will feel that this is hope, right? Phyllis followed his line of sight and also moved her eyes to the girl on the bed. But it's always better to have more abilities, isn't it? Lightning said confidently. I feel that not only will I be able to condense magic, but I will also be able to obtain several branches of abilities, because the most outstanding explorer will definitely get the most generous rewards. Goo. Maggie, who was standing beside the bed, also raised her arms as if to support the other party. There's no such logic at all. Mystery Moon shouted. The room suddenly became noisy. Looking at the lively scene in front of him, Roland smiled and shook his head, then walked out of the room. Why don't you go in and have a look? After closing the door, he said to a man standing in the corridor, leaning against the wall. Chapter 10:20. The explorer was still dressed like a libertine, with feathers all over his body and an eye patch embroidered with rose petals on his right eye. It was hard to associate him with Thunder just by looking at his makeup, but somehow, Roland felt that he was a little different from how he looked at the banquet. When pretending to be someone, you need to put your heart and soul into it. You even have to think that you are that person in order to deceive others. This was the first thing she taught me when I was learning how to disguise myself. Thunder took a puff of his pipe. The faint red light of the pipe looked like a looming firefly in the dark corridor. Your Majesty, I'm afraid I can't concentrate on pretending to be Sandy Asuka now. She'll see through me. So this is where the strange feeling came from, Roland thought. Because of the certain danger of adulthood, he could no longer pretend to be an unrelated outsider and indifferent to his daughter. If he cared, he would not be Sandy Asuka. Do you want to keep hiding it like this? Roland raised his eyebrows. You should have heard what Lightning said just now. She's destined to walk the path of an explorer. This question made Thunder silent for a long time. It was so long that Roland thought he would not answer. Then he said, Your Majesty, do you believe in fate? For a moment, Roland had some doubts about Thunder's identity as an explorer. Wasn't this the classic opening gesture of preaching? Of course, similar questions were common in love letters from high school students. However, it was clear that the other party was not here to seek answers. Someone once told me that the excellent would often die at what they were best at, and to make up for it, the heavens would always bestow such people with unparalleled talent. This is fate, a path that seems to have been predestined. Because of their extraordinary talent, they would be lured away and eventually fall. On the other hand, ordinary people with ordinary abilities would usually live longer. Who said that? Roland could not help but ask. Sandy, the person who introduced me to the path of an explorer. Thunder took a puff of his pipe. Wait, is there really such an explorer in the fjords? Aren't you afraid that Lightning might have heard of his name? He's been dead for many years. He was unknown when he was alive, and he's still the same after his death. According to the standards of the fjords, he can't even be regarded as a real explorer. Surrounded by the smoke, Thunder's figure almost merged with the shadows on the wall. Until the time of his death, he couldn't find a new island or a route that hadn't been marked on the nautical chart. Sandy doesn't care about his fame. He says that exploration is a kind of pleasure in itself. There's nothing wrong with lacking talent. At least you don't have to worry about whether you'll die young. Roland seemed to realize something. Then how did he die? You died to save me, Thunder said slowly. The ship was attacked by sea ghosts. When Sandy dragged me back to the cabin, I was clawed. The wound wasn't big, but the herbs didn't work. His flesh quickly decayed, and 3 days later he stopped breathing. At that time, he told me that he still died doing what he was good at. He didn't have any other good points in his life. The only thing he was good at was his kindness. Roland suddenly found that he didn't know what to say. After Lightning was born, she showed an outstanding talent for exploration. Whether it was identifying the route or drawing the nautical chart, her learning speed was much faster than the average person. When Thunder said these words, the expression on his face became extremely complicated. When I learned that she had awakened as a witch, my worry rose to the peak. You should know what this ability means to an explorer. Indeed, if courage, curiosity, and the desire for knowledge were still hidden human nature, and anyone could stimulate them, then having magic power could only be said to be a gift from God. That's why I made this decision. Thunder raised his head, and the light in his eyes seemed to reflect the red light in the pipe. If fate is difficult to avoid, maybe I can cut it off in another way. If I can hurry up and unveil those unknown places before Lightning officially embarks on the path of an explorer, the chances of her encountering danger will be greatly reduced. Apart from the territories occupied by the demons, the only places that have yet to be set foot on by humans are the Eastern Sealine and the Precipice Continent seen in the Shadow Waters ruins. When you defeat the demons, I should be able to draw a map of these two places. But before that, it's better for me to act alone. If there was no place to explore, naturally there would be no risk. This answer made Roland couldn't help but be moved. Although the world might be far larger than he imagined, to be able to have such an idea in this era was not something that could be summed up by the word courage alone. Gravity firmly fixed everyone on the ground, but it couldn't restrict the thoughts of some crazy people. And Thunder was obviously one of the best. Flying was not only the exclusive right of witches. I understand what you mean. Roland raised the corner of his mouth. Don't worry, I promise that after the Battle of Divine Will, you'll get a safe and sound lightning. I'll leave everything to you, Your Majesty. Thunder put his hand on his chest. At this moment, a sudden exclamation came from the room. Roland nodded to the other party and turned back to the bedroom. One side of the wall had been pushed open, but he didn't hear the sound of the sigil of gods while being activated. Your Majesty, Vendi said excitedly. Lightning, her magic power has been condensed. Another witch who would be promoted on the day of adulthood. Chapter 1021. Like Lucia's day of adulthood, Lightning's promotion was gratifying, but it also brought some trouble to Roland. Was there anyone injured in the residential area last night? The next day, after listening to Barev's report, Roland could not help but raise his eyebrows. Yes, Your Majesty. The voice of the other party came from the other side of the phone. An unlucky guy was going to the toilet, but he was startled by the explosion and broke his leg. 2 other guys rolled down from their beds and hit their heads. Early in the morning, a large group of panicked subjects came to the city hall and asked if Neverwinter had been attacked by demons or demonic beasts. It took the servants a lot of effort to persuade them to leave. Your Majesty, can you tell me before something like this happens in the future? Even through the phone, Roland could imagine Barev's plaintive look. Perhaps the old director was also scared out of his wits and waited for dawn the whole night. How are the injured now? They've all been sent to the hospital. Their lives are not a problem, but the subjects are still talking about it. There are still people guarding the bulletin board in the central square, waiting for the announcement. This must be caused by the witch's ability, right? If you had informed me in advance, I wouldn't have bothered you with such trivial matters. I see. But things related to magic power are unpredictable. It's not that I don't trust you. Roland comforted him. Just say on the announcement that I'm developing a new weapon, and there will be similar incidents in the future. Don't panic. If there is an enemy attack, follow the alarm. By the way, City Hall will pay for the injured people's medical expenses. Yes. Your Majesty, Barev said aggrievedly. Roland shook his head helplessly and then hung up the phone. Roland did not know why the old director had become more and more clingy recently. Although he handled the government affairs well, the tone of Your Majesty, I've dedicated all my light and warmth to you. You can't let me down still gave him goosebumps. On the contrary, the conversation with the Pearl of the Northern region was much more pleasant. Roland did not know where she was now. Putting aside his distracting thoughts, he looked at Lightning, who was standing in front of his desk with her head down. He asked with a faint smile. You should have heard what I just said, right? Woo. The little girl said dejectedly. Your Majesty, I was wrong. Please punish me by doing 2 sets of exercises. Roland looked at Maggie, who was above her head. Maggie looked away with difficulty and pretended that it had nothing to do with her. Coo. Although the members of the exploration group were very close, Maggie chose to remain silent in the face of the comprehensive exercises. He finally could not help but laugh out loud. Haha. All right, raise your head. This is not your fault. After all, I was the one who agreed to let you fly. I should be the one to take responsibility. Really? Lightning suddenly raised her head, her eyes sparkling. Of course, you don't know that doing so will cause damage. Plus, the loss won't be big, so you can skip the exercises. As the flight route was in the direction of the impassable mountain range, her impact on the residential area was very limited. Except for the cracked windows of the castle and the Foreign Affairs building, the other buildings were basically intact. When passing above the furnace area, Lightning had climbed to a certain height, and her impact was further reduced. It was difficult for her to cause any more damage. Your Majesty, you're really great. She seemed to have recovered all her energy in an instant. Maggie also spread her wings in relief. Seeing that the bird and the human were about to pounce on him, Roland quickly raised his hand to stop them. But does flying at such a high speed really consume so much magic power? You flew for less than 15 minutes yesterday, right? Hearing this, Lightning suddenly felt a little embarrassed and said, I was also very surprised. At that time, I wanted to save some magic power for testing, but I tried to speed up a little to see where the limit was. I didn't expect that my magic power would be consumed so quickly, and I almost fell from the sky. Can you still go faster? Vendi, who was taking notes at the side, immediately caught the key point. Yes, Lightning said confidently. As long as there's enough magic power. At that time, even the sound of the wind in my ears disappeared, and I even felt that nothing could stop me from continuing to sprint. What about Maggie? Was she squatting on top of your head? Before Lightning could answer, Maggie had already turned in a circle. Too fast, dizzy in my arms, Is she saying that I felt uncomfortable flying too fast, so I was carried in her arms? Roland found that his ability to understand pidgin language had greatly improved, and he could now automatically fill in the gaps in the middle of the sentence. Just dizzy. Another witch in charge of the ability test, Agatha, said, You didn't feel any change in the airflow. Well, Lightning thought for a moment and said, Although I was wearing a pair of goggles at that time, the wind seemed to have suddenly disappeared halfway through the flight. What do you think? Roland looked at the ice witch and asked, Is there any record of such a derivative ability in the Union? Although Lightning had accidentally consumed most of her magic power, causing the ability test to be temporarily put on hold, the Witch Union had now established a set of systematic evaluation procedures. Coupled with the inherited experience of the Union, even if they did not use their ability, they could still make a general judgment through questioning and the examination of the stone of measuring.